First and foremost, Gonzalo, how are you? Is everything okay?
Yes, thank you very much for asking. Things are going very well. The Russians are clearly advancing here in Kharkov. There is almost 24-hour barrages of shelling or missiles, or I have no idea what it is, but explosions coming predominantly from the east of the city. I could not tell you precisely where, and even if I were aware of where it's coming from, I wouldn't want to say, because I don't want to get involved in any kind of situation that might bring anybody any harm. That being said, the city is mostly deserted. And in my own case, I'm still here because I want to see how it ends. The train service is running. The remaining people are leaving. We're just waiting for the denouement of this situation. I would say that it's really going to depend on the Russian, on factors that we don't know. The Russians, if they decide to be really aggressive and really take the city, the defenders, if they're going to fight to the death or realize that it's pointless and it would be a pointless death and that they should just surrender. We'll see. We'll see how long this siege takes. But even in the worst case scenario, I do not see this going beyond, say, 2 weeks.
Leaving for where?
By the
leaving
end
for
of
where,
April,
Gonzalo?
the trains?
Yeah, the people you said they're leaving, where are they leaving for? Are they going up towards Russia? Where are they being taken? Where are they going? Do you know?
The trains are leaving to the west. Okay. There are no trains, as far as I know, that are going to Russia. Now, I'm assuming that they're going west, but it's not something that I'm paying attention to at this point, because everybody who wanted to leave has left. And the people who are staying are just people like me that have decided, this will happen. It'll be over soon. And so let's just sit tight. My thinking is that by the end of April, the Russians will have the city firmly in hand, one way or the other. Either it will be completely annihilated, or it will be more or less intact. Now, I do have to emphasize that you see a lot of images of Kharkov, and decimated buildings and so forth. You have to keep in mind that this is a city of 1.4 million people, or 1.6, I always forget. It is a very large city. So seeing sporadic buildings just destroyed or whatnot is not indicative of the wider city. And the area that I'm in the center of the city. It's intact, okay? And so the fighting is going on the outskirts of the city, okay? And that's what I can report at this time on the ground here in Kharkov. Okay, but the Russians are winning. They are advancing. They are slowly tightening the noose around the city, and there is really nothing to be done by the Zelensky regime forces, because they're simply outmatched. They're outgunned. It's when you have a 12-year-old step into a ring with Mike Tyson in his prime, you know how it's going to end. There's no real doubt. Okay, and that's the situation here. Yeah.
Can I ask you one more simple question? Because I'm just kind of curious. And if you don't want to answer, that's fine. But what do you do about like food or medicine, or do you walk out in the street, or just if you don't want to answer, that's fine as well. I'm just curious.
It's a very good question, and a lot of people have asked it. Sure. What happens is that there's a Google map that is updated every day that shows you the pharmacies, gas stations, and supermarkets that are open, the ones that are closed, and the ones that are permanently closed. Okay, permanently closed in the sense that they're out of stock. Okay, and they have been rotating. Okay, and now what happens is that you go to a supermarket, and most of the shelves are bare. Actually, what I'll do is I'll go to one in the next few days and videotape one so that you get a sense of it. It's like the supermarket is completely bare, except for certain items, like for instance, water, milk, eggs, and bread. There's always those supplies. The water supply, the tap in Kharkov, it has like dirty water. Okay, I don't really know what it exactly has, but everybody drinks bottled water. Okay, and usually you get these big 20-liter jugs that are delivered to your home or office, and you install those, and you drink from those usually. But obviously those companies are not delivering now. And so what you have is in the supermarkets, you have these, 5-liter bottles, those big bottles that you can carry that, yeah. And so you get those, and there's milk, there's eggs, and they only sell like the big, trays, the 36 egg trays, right? And tomatoes, like a lot of damn tomatoes, man. I don't want to see tomatoes for a while. I'll tell you that right now. And bread. Okay, and I'll tell you something else. I lived in Paris. Okay, in the on the Rue de Vignon, right around the corner from the Église de la Madeleine, and I had access to some pretty good bakeries there. But this is like the best bread ever. It's fresh, hot. It's fantastic. I don't know where the hell they were hiding this stuff, because it's really good. Anyway, yeah, that's like the one luxury that I at least am partaking in, of just like getting this incredibly good bread. And yeah, the pharmacies, I don't go to pharmacy because I don't have any health condition, but they are open and they rotate. Okay. And they try to keep stock on the basic medicines that people will need for whatever, insulin and the rest of it. And gas stations, well, they're pretty much gone. I mean, the gas stations are pretty much empty because there are no trucks resupplying the gas stations. Okay. So at this point, there's, the gasoline you have in your car, that's it. And that's Kharkov, which is under siege. Okay, because it is under siege. You have to understand that that's what's going on here. It is a city under siege, though I would argue that it's a very gentle siege.
Right. Okay, great. Well, let's get started then on our topic. The title of this live stream is kind of a sit rep, but say a geopolitical sit rep instead of a military, though we'll talk about the situation on the ground as well. So, we've got 21, we finished 21 days. We're on day 22 of this conflict, plus 8 years, because everyone always leaves out the 8-year part. Gentlemen, Alexander, Gonzalo, where do you guys want to begin? And let's just talk about where we are today and how you see things moving forward.
Well, I think today the big news is going to be this meeting, this telephone call between Biden and Xi Jinping. And the Chinese, very uncharacteristically, have been briefing people in advance of it. And they've been making it absolutely clear as crystal that they will push back very hard if the US tries to pressure them to take any position which is essentially hostile to Russia on Ukraine. So when the Russians and the Chinese were saying at the beginning of February that they each have the other's back, it's turning out exactly like that. I'm going to make a quick observation. I think that it was a serious mistake for the US administration to engage with China in this way. I think that they perhaps, if they did underestimate the extent to which the Chinese were going to stand by the Russians, then that was a major miscalculation. And I think also to try to put pressure on China. Anybody who has any experience at all of modern Chinese history would know that the worst thing to try and do with China is to try to put pressure on them. The kind of history that China went through over the last 200 years means that no Chinese government can ever be seen to bend to pressure in that kind of way, and that they'll just harden their positions in response, and they're already threatening countermeasures. So I think that's one thing that's happened. The other thing that's happening is, if we're talking about the economics, it's, I think, becoming increasingly clear, exactly as Gonzalo had been saying in earlier programs, exactly as Tom Longo said in the one program so far that we've done with him, though I'm sure that we'll be doing more, that the attempt to destroy the Russian economy, at least for the time being, at least, has failed. The financial situation is stable. Interestingly, Putin has reappointed Elvira Nabiullina to be chair of the Russian Central Bank. There were rumors that she was going to resign, that she was, opposed to this whole operation. Well, that clearly isn't the case. And she's still there. She's I'm going to say this straightforwardly, and I've been somebody who's been very critical of her in the past. I felt that her interest rate policy for a long time was too harsh. I think she's handled the situation at the moment with great skill, and clearly people who are looking for divisions within the Russian political class on this issue are wrong. So stabilization in Russia, growing queasiness in Europe, and I suspect also increasingly in the United States, because I think things are not turning out quite the way people expected. Oil prices are now once again above $100, and they're going to go on rising. Nobody should be under any doubts about this. MBS in Saudi Arabia is still refusing to take Biden's calls. The foreign minister of the UAE has just been in Moscow, where he's been talking with Lavrov, and that was another friendly visit, apparently. So I think the economics are not turning out in the way that people anticipated. We're definitely, I think, heading into a serious recession in the West. And of course, it's a recession where there are going to be structural problems, which we've now created for ourselves through this overreach of sanctions that I think we can't really extricate ourselves from. And if you want to see the doubts, the worries, the fears that are now circulating, go to The Economist. The Economist is the most anti-Russian, neocon type magazine in Britain. I mean, it outdoes all the others. And you see that the headline article in The Economist is The Alternative World Order: China, Russia, and the others. Very much all the things that Gonzalo was saying. But even The Economist is now starting to acknowledge that it's beginning to take shape.
Gonzalo, what do you think? What do you want to discuss?
Oh, sorry about that. I thought I muted myself by accident to listen to Alexander. No, I completely agree with what Alexander is saying. It seems very clear that the sanctions, not even in the long run, in the medium and even in the short term, are proving to be a disaster. I think that Putin very wisely is hammering away at the fact that essentially what the West has done by confiscating Russian foreign currency, foreign currency deposits, it's basically a default of the West towards Russia. And if you look at it from that point of view, it scares people. And it certainly scares the Saudis. And I think that also what freaks them out, what freaks out a lot of other countries, is the capriciousness of these catastrophic measures that really aimed, I mean, it was very open. They wanted to destroy the Russian economy. And number one, they have clearly failed because the ruble is stabilizing. And a lot of, fairly smart people are making the play that maybe the ruble is the currency of the future because it's backed by commodities and the dollar is not. And so people are realizing this was a catastrophic decision. I mean, more thoughtful people, I don't know if they're in the administration or not, but outside of the administration, people are saying that it hurt the Americans reputationally, and it did not cause the catastrophic damage to the Russian economy. And in many ways, and the speech that Putin said yesterday kind of like it indicates that the Russian leadership is thinking this way. In many ways, these sanctions forced the issue of decoupling of Russia from the West to the benefit of Russia long term. And it's really interesting because it also gave Putin the opportunity to tell oligarchs and what he called fifth columnists, people who are Russians who are enamored of the West and who want to be a part of the neoliberal Western paradigm. Well, you're traitors. Go to your Western masters if you're not going to contribute to us here in Russia, because here in Russia, we need you to invest and work here in our homeland for our people. I think that the sanctions, all in all, have proven to be a boon. And finally, the sanctions have clearly improved Putin's internal position. And he is clearly unchallenged. And there is still talk, idiotic talk as far as I'm concerned, of Western commentariat of saying that there's going to be an internal coup and they're going to get rid of Putin. What are they smoking? I mean, for crying out loud, because of these sanctions, his approval rating is through the roof because the Russian people and the Russian leadership class sees that the West hates them. And so it's all going Putin's way, for crying out loud. Oh my God.
Yeah, I think, Gonzalo, you made a very, very acute point that for the Russians, this has resolved an internal debate. If you look back to the 1990s and indeed the early 2000s, the kind of people who were running economic policy in Russia, not just people like Gaidar and Chubais in the 90s, but some of Putin's early team, people like German Gref, people like Alexander Kudrin, the finance minister. The whole conception was that you integrate Russia completely in the West, that it becomes essentially a Western country. That was their idea. So they took a completely different approach to the one the Chinese took. And you can see this best in the way that the Russians operated their currency, the ruble, as compared to the Chinese. Now, the Chinese maintained very tough capital controls. You can't just convert the RMB. I always call it the RMB, by the way, the Chinese currency, into dollars, euros, whatever. You can't just change your money and take it out of China and go to the West, at least not in large quantities, because it's a controlled currency. It operates within capital controls. Now, what that meant was that Western companies, big companies, if they opened factories in China, they weren't selling ultimately for the Chinese market. They were selling for Western markets. They were producing to use lower wages in China and lower costs in China to gain competitive advantage in Western markets. So that helped to a great extent to build up the Chinese export machine. Now, Russia, by contrast, went for a fully convertible ruble, which meant that any money you could made in Russia, you could convert very rapidly into dollars or euros or pounds sterling or yen, but obviously principally dollars and euros. And that meant that Western companies that built factories in Russia were selling goods to the Russian market. And then they were converting their profits and extracting their profits from Russia and were investing them, bringing them home, repatriating them to the West. So it's a completely different approach. And it explains, by the way, one of the reasons why the Russians found it very difficult to develop, specifically in consumer goods industries, which is the area where we talk about import penetration. It was difficult for them to develop industries in their own domestic market, Russian industries, that could compete with Westerners. In China, it wasn't a problem because Apple in China was focused always on exporting Apple products abroad. So that left space for the Huawei's and the others. In Russia, it was always more difficult because Apple bringing in its products to Russia, it was just for Apple another market. So now that we have capital controls, the whole calculus changes. And the fact that you see Western companies exiting Russia is creating a space. And anybody who thinks that that space isn't going to be filled is completely wrong. But it's creating a space for Russian businesses and companies. And the other thing to understand is that the fact that the Russians have been able to stabilize, keep their banking system stable, keep their financial system operating, avoid any kind of hyperinflation crisis, means that it's going to be profitable for people to set up businesses in Russia and to develop them, and Russians to set up businesses in Russia, providing the kind of products that Western importers did. So we're going to see a change. And note, it's very interesting that Putin, when he spoke about the need to maintain market solutions, to give options, opportunities to Russian entrepreneurs. Those people are now going to be not just supported, but they've now been given a market that they can develop and move into. Exactly the same thing happened previously in 2014 with the food and agricultural system in Russia. The Russians in 2014, as counter sanctions, blocked imports of food products from the European Union and the United States. It caused an inflation blip, but ultimately domestic producers were able to step in very fast. And you're going to see the same thing happen with consumer goods this time.
Yeah, I agree. We're already seeing some of that. I mean, you have like, they have their own Instagram now that's coming out, for example. I hear that the McDonald's shops are being taken over by local Russian businesses. They don't have to worry about IP or copyright or any of that stuff anymore. From what I understand, in Moscow, everything is running pretty much normal. Chinese phones are flying off the shelves. That's the information that I'm getting. And the ruble is strengthening. The ruble is strengthening. I think it was at 95 or 98 last time I checked. So you know, Biden's speech to Congress, his State of the Union, where he was gloating about, you know, the 30 or 40% drop in the ruble, and now we got them, everybody. We've taken out corn pop. That didn't last for long.
It's just so stupid. Look, I have never understood this bullying approach to diplomacy, because that's what it is. It's this bullying approach. Do it our way, or we're going to beat you. And what happens, of course, with every bully is that eventually his bluff is called. And what the little kid discovers is that getting hit by the bully doesn't hurt that bad. And it turns out that the little kid actually might hurt the bully a lot more than either of them realize it. And I think that a development that has happened today, that DW, the German state media, news outlet said, was that in the Black Sea there are something like 200 or 300 ships full of grain that the Russians are not allowing to leave, because they basically control the Black Sea. And so these ships are just sitting tight there, even though Odessa is not under the control of Russia. And parenthetically, when we get to those developments, I personally believe that Odessa will be the last city that the Russians deal with, and I think that it'll fall without a shot. And I'll get to why when we get there. But the Russians are basically, I mean, if you want to put it in a very negative light, you could say that the Russians are holding grain hostage. The more important point is that they are asserting their control over the grain supply. And something I had not realized until I actually started looking at the figures. You know, everybody talks about Ukraine and Belarus to a lesser extent, and of course Russia as major producers of grain. Do you know the other huge producer that I had never realized was Kazakhstan?
Kazakhstan.
Kazakhstan is a huge producer. So between those four countries that are all dancing to the Kremlin's tune, because, well, we have the problem here in Ukraine, obviously, but once this is sorted out, which I expect the war to end by the end of April, once this is sorted out, Russia is going to have at least 1/3 of the global trade in grains. They can decide, I mean, this is an incredibly powerful weapon. And it's not even that they're going to use it. It's just the fact that they have this enormous stick that nobody's going to dare cross them. And I want to see how the Europeans deal with this particular problem when this crops up. Anyway, that's why I wanted to say that the issue of grain.
Absolutely. Can I just add 2 points to Gonzalo's point, additional to them, about, a bully always risks having their bluff called. The US's bluff was called by the Russians on one particular issue just this week, which is the debt Russia's sovereign debt, which is that when the sanctions were rolled out against the central bank and the central bank's assets were frozen, there was the question about whether or not the Russians would be able to pay their debt from their frozen assets. And I'm going to say straight away, because I followed all the commentary in great detail, the universal assumption, I mean, the stated thing was that they would not be, that there would be time given for Western people, for Western companies to unwind their positions with Russian sovereign debt. In other words, to stop making purchases and those sort of things. But there was no suggestion 2 or 3 weeks ago when those sanctions were announced that the Russians would be able to continue to make interest payments. And this week they called the bluff and they made the interest payments. What they actually did was there was payments came up were due for payment on Wednesday. The Russians gave instructions to JP Morgan, where some of their money is held, to pay the interest payments. JP Morgan consulted the Fed, importantly. They also consulted the Treasury Department, and they fulfilled Russian instructions and made the interest payments. Yeah. Now, if the theory is that this is no longer going to be possible beyond May, but in fact, if you go into the careful language of the sanctions, it leaves open the possibility that interest payments can continue to be made. In other words, sovereign debt can continue to be paid beyond May. And I suspect it will be, because for all the reasons that Gonzalo was saying earlier, again, you go all the way back now to programs that we were making with him even before the war started. The Fed doesn't want to rock the global financial system. So they do not want to see a sovereign default by a G20 economy. And I am sure that they're giving that kind of advice. So I think that this attempt to engineer a Russian default, I think that wiser heads have prevailed. And already we've seen that particular bluff has, in effect, been called. So the Russians still are able to use their reserves for that purpose, which is to pay foreign debt. That is the one thing. The other thing I wanted to say is about Gonzalo talking about, a bullies people all over the place. And sometimes they come up against a little guy and they find that the little guy stands up to them and it doesn't turn out as they expected. Well, that's essentially what's happened between the US and Russia, because let's face it, Russia is nowhere near as rich or as powerful as the US is. But already we see that they've been able to take all kinds of steps and things are not turning out the way the US expected. But of course, if you try to bully a big guy, a guy who in some respects is bigger than yourself, then you're in serious trouble. And that, it seems to me, is what the US is now drifting into doing with China. And before we did this program, Gonzalo, I showed to Alex a article. It wasn't an article, it's a press release on Global Times, in which there's a Chinese official who's been going around briefing the Chinese media. This is very unusual for the Chinese to do this, by the way. And he's been saying things, this official, whoever he is, and I'm guessing that he's a very senior person in the Chinese government. He says that if the United States tries to put any pressure on us, they will fail. And if they take any action against us, we will retaliate. This is specifically on the issue of Ukraine. And I'm going to make an observation. I think that our the president, not my president, but the American president, Joe Biden, is, as we all know, a man of 79. And he's also somebody who perhaps is not as bright mentally as he might have been. And I can't help but think that in his, shall we say, elderly way, he still imagines that the world is as it was 15, 20 years ago,
Yeah,
when the
absolutely.
president of the United States could indeed push China, Russia, India, all of these other countries around, that they would, tremble before the words of the US president. And I think he's still, almost senile fashion, repeating all that, not, I think, having realized or internalized the extent to which the world has changed.
Yeah. Can I completely agree with you, by the way. Completely agree. His senility makes him think that it's still 1990 something. Yeah. But I just want to go back a little bit to what you were discussing insofar as the bond situation is concerned.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, a lot of these sovereign debt issuances, the contracts are long. These are not easy instruments. Okay.
Yeah.
The instructions, the actual contract is, book length.
Yeah.
So they have a lot of caveats and a lot of different things. And so what the Fed is doing of essentially saying, in a technically legal sense, the money is not going back to Russia.
Yeah.
It's staying outside of Russia, but it's just going from the Russian account to the account of the bondholders in the United States. It's a technicalism that they are using to not have a sovereign debt default. Now, if Russian debt were to default, I mean, a lot of people could argue, and Russia could argue in court, that they never defaulted. They had the money, they wanted to pay, they were just prevented by force majeure.
Yeah.
And this actually, in a lot of these contracts, would benefit the Russians, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's that issue going on, because a lot of these bond contracts are sort of like boilerplate, and a lot of times they have force majeure sections that, of course, never contemplate something like what has gone on, but could possibly be used to explain away a lot. But that's a side issue. The main issue, I think, are twofold. Number one, the Fed doesn't want Russia to default under any circumstances, because a lot of the people who hold Russian foreign debt are American pension funds.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, I read somewhere that the Kansas City Teachers Pension Funds has a huge position in Russian sovereign debt, huge relative to their other assets. I mean, in the scheme of things, it's a tiny little fund, but their position is something like 80%, which was rational because the Russians pay, and the Russians have their commodities markets that guarantee that they'll get the influx of funds to pay off their debts. And so, yeah, it's not as good as gold, but pretty damn close, right? And so it was perfectly reasonable for the asset managers of that particular pension funds and the other pension funds that are holding Russian assets to get those Russian assets. And so now that they could potentially be in default, a lot of people's pensions in the United States could be hurt. So I think this regime of using the current account that Russia has on deposit with JP Morgan and whatever other banks, they're going to continue with that. And I think that what's going to happen, and is likely the case, is that through back channels, the Russian Ministry of Finance is talking to JP Morgan and talking to the Fed, and they're just going to quietly keep on paying them off. So I don't think that the Russian debt is ever going to default, and I think that it might actually be a smart investment. I'm not arguing this. I'm just saying this as an observation. I'm not making the investment suggestion, but it might be actually a good deal. Okay. Number one. But number two, the Russians will never again issue debt in the West. And of course not. They never will again. And so because of that, the United States has deprived itself of enormous leverage over the Russians. They pulled a financial nuclear weapon on the Russians, and it was the one go. They're never going to put out paper in the West. They are, whatever is going on with their current account outside of Russia in the West, they're going to let that wind down and pay off all their foreign debts. And then they're just going to forget about it. They're never going to use the Western financial system ever again, not even via proxies or not even via Hong Kong or something like that. And I don't think that the West understands that a commodities-rich country like Russia, with enormous natural resources of all kinds, renewable, mineral, petroleum, energy, all the rest of it, they are cutting out the Western financial markets. That hurts the Western financial markets far more than it hurts them. And it's going to benefit, in order of importance, the Chinese financial markets and the Russian financial markets. They did not think this through. It was a stupid emotional decision that is having catastrophic results on the Western financial system. Okay, I mean, I just want to emphasize that point.
I think you're absolutely right. I have nothing specific to add to that. I think you're completely right. Just on the issue of force majeure, which is, by the way, I've worked in. It's an area that once upon a time I was very, very familiar with. You're absolutely right. I think the Russians have a very strong legal defense on force majeure. And of course, you've got to understand that if you're a bondholder and you are not able to recover your money because of actions by the US government, well, then you might decide, if you're a US bondholder, that the people you should be suing are not the Russians, because what can the Russians do? You sue the US government. So I mean, this is, I'm not predicting anything, because I don't, this is a complex situation. But I can very, very easily see how this could result in a flood of court cases, which I think might be very embarrassing. And I think that, that's of course only a minor part of this. The fundamental, essential one is the one that you've been making, that, this isn't something that the Fed certainly would want to see. I mean, they have a very difficult situation now, keeping the US economy on a stable footing after all the administration has done. And I'm sure that's their primary concern. But, I'm sure they've been getting legal advice, as the US Treasury Department, and they've probably been telling them, that this isn't an easy situation. If you start defaulting on your obligations, your legal obligations to the Russians in this kind of fashion, then you're exposing yourself to action, not by the Russians, legal action, but by affected parties.
Exactly. And here's something else too. If you cut off the Russians, that they don't have access to their funds, right? And they, of course, cannot sell their bonds, you're isolating them. So the Russians are basically, that money is lost. They write it off. It's going to hurt, of course, but at the end of the day, it's surplus. It's extra that they have. It's not money that they need. Whereas the bondholders, it's money that they need. Okay, so this was, I just find it just so incredibly stupid. The people who made this decision, and I suspect it was Obama himself. Obama himself was like, let's go and just sanction to show that, I'm really smart. I'm a master manipulator of the global stage. I mean, I'm convinced that one of the big hands pulling the strings on the Joe Biden puppet is Obama. And he's just so damn stupid. But anyway, moving on.
I'm sure you're right. Notice that he's been very, very silent.
He's in the shadows.
Which is an infallible sign, in my opinion, that he's very actively involved. Is he stunned?
He likes to manipulate from the shadows. But if this was well planned, these sanctions, you wouldn't have the U.S. running to Venezuela and to Iran, and you wouldn't have Boris Johnson running to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. If this was well planned. But let's talk about what's going on in Ukraine at the moment. At least what you guys know, because there's a lot of fog of war, and things are moving very, very quickly. But let's try to, if we can, add some clarity as to what's going on in Ukraine right now. And just real quick, let me read you this, which has to do with what's going on in Moscow with the rally for the Crimea Reunification Day. The reports are coming out saying that there are 200,000 people at a rally to celebrate this day. This is coming from the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Russia. The number they're putting is 200,000. I've heard 120. I've heard 240. I don't know. Putin spoke at the rally. He said Crimeans did the right thing by putting a hard barrier in the way of neo-Nazis. He said Russia did a lot to raise Crimea and Sevastopol. They had to be pulled out of a humiliating state as part of Ukraine. Putin also said that genocide was committed against Donbass. The purpose of the military operation of the Russian Federation is to get rid of it. and Putin said on the actions of the Russian military in Ukraine, they cover each other. We have not had such unity for a long time. That's what Putin said during this event. Alexander, Gonzalo, what are your thoughts as to what's going on in Ukraine and how Putin is handling it?
Well, I think that this all goes very much to the points that both Hugh and Gonzalo were making earlier, that this has actually resulted in a consolidation in Russian society. By the way, I was reading, I think it was on the BBC website, that somebody from the British media went to a Russian town called Kostroma, where there was the funeral of a soldier who's died in this operation, and found, that pretty much everybody there was supporting this operation. So, I mean, they accepted the logic of it. And I have to say, I think the sanctions war, the extraordinary attacks on pretty much everything that's Russian, which is now, by the way, affecting a friend of mine who lives in Britain and who is by no means a fan of President Putin. I'm not going to say who it is, but even he is now apparently starting to adjust his opinions. So, I think this was incredibly and disastrously ill-judged. Now, about the situation on the ground, I always have to repeat the observation that I'm not a person with any kind of military background or experience. I'm not the best person to assess things, but it seems to me that the major battle is happening in Donbass, that apparently, well, not apparently, every indication that I'm getting is that the situation in Donbass is very, very rapidly reaching a conclusion. The Russian Ministry of Defense spoke today about the noose tightening on the ultra radical groups that are resisting in Mariupol. Apparently, there are, hours, days, I'm not going to try and guesstimate, but very soon that resistance in Mariupol is going to collapse. Severodonetsk, which is in the north of the Donbass, is apparently also, and it's apparently another important place, is coming close to collapse as well. And I gather that this is now the general trend, and that the Russians have announced some sort of a no-fly zone over the Donbass, which is apparently also now coming into operation. And I would quickly finish this brief summary of the military position. I saw this sentence in an article about the war in the British newspaper, the Daily Telegraph, and I sent it to Alex earlier, and it reads, military experts have warned that Russia is planning a lightning advance upwards from southern Ukraine to link with other battalions to encircle Volodymyr Zelensky's army and claim it has won the war. So it's another admission from parts of the British media that there is this cauldron, this tightening around the Ukrainian forces in Donbass taking place. There was an earlier admission, if you remember, which we discussed in the London Times a couple of days ago. Now we have another one in the Daily Telegraph. And I think that these snippets are essentially ways of some people trying to convey to the British public, who are being fed a completely different account of the state of the war, but they're preparing them at some level for the fact that some kind of collapse of the Ukrainian forces in the Donbass is coming. And just to finish on this, my own view, and again, I'm taking this as a completely ignoramus, if you like, or well, not an ignoramus, but somebody who's not, who finds military assessments, they're not my area of expertise. But I'm going to make a guess that if and when the point when the Russians may decide that they want to roll into places like Kharkiv, Chernigov, Sumy, all of these places we've been hearing so much about, it'll be when you start to see the major Ukrainian forces in the Donbass start to collapse. Yeah. One of the fundamental mistakes the West makes, and again, I come back to Clausewitz. Clausewitz always used to say, ignore the cities, Focus
Yeah.
on the enemy's ability to continue fighting. Your target is not the cities, it's the enemy's army. I should say, I've actually read quite a lot of Clausewitz in my time, because he actually talks a lot about politics rather than, war. That always stood out for me.
I'm sorry, Alexander, I have to cut you off. Agricola says one part of Clausewitz's doctrine is to win, you have to break the enemy's will to fight. To do this, you have to beat his army decisively. Sorry, but that's the quote. There you go.
Well, there you go. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. No, well, my thinking about the situation, it's very interesting that the Telegraph finally is mentioning this and coming up with this incredibly foolish subterfuge of the Russians carrying out a lightning offensive to the north. No, this has been incredibly systematic, and it's been going on since the very beginning of this war of surrounding the army, the army of the main army of Ukraine, which is in the east and the Donbass near the contact line, and nobody's talking about this, but that is clearly where the war is. The news around Kharkov, for instance, I've said before that it's closing, but if the Russians decided, hell, we're going to take the city, they could take it in an afternoon. Okay. I mean, it's an issue that they don't want to, because they realize the incredible destruction of it. They also realize, I think too, that it's just smarter to just slowly tighten and squeeze, but not make any sudden moves, just to demoralize. And get more deserters, because I think that's their prime motivation, to get deserters. Okay, because they again, I've said this from the very beginning of the war, they want to capture the country, but they also want to capture the army, because you need an army to actually guard and maintain order in a country. If you annihilate the army, you have chaos. You have Iraq, basically, after the Second Gulf War, and they don't want that. So anyway. The situation that I have heard so far is that Mariupol is going to fall. That's inevitable. Just before we started a couple of hours ago, I heard that Sector 4, on the left bank in Mariupol, had fallen. And there are basically 4 sectors of the city that are maintaining resistance. And the city itself is just demolished, of course, because that's where the hardcore Nazis are. It's their last stand. Yeah. And they're not going to give up. They're going to fight to the death, because they know that they're dead men if the Russians capture them. The Russians, by the way, are having all military-age men strip to show if they have any tattoos, any Nazi tattoos. Okay, not strip in any kind of ridiculous way. Just raise up your shirt, show your belly and your back and your arms to make sure that there are no Nazi insignia. And they have captured a lot of people who do have that Nazi insignia. And that goes to show you that the Azov battalion, the Nazis, the neo, I'm sorry, I mentioned the word that you don't like using, the neo bad guys of the 30s and 40s. Well, there are a lot of them in Mariupol, and that is ending. There's no escape for those men, because there's no way to resupply them, refit them, refuel them, or evacuate them, or reinforce them. So it's over for them. It's just a matter of time. Now, insofar as the main army to the east, which is obviously the #1 priority, the West has no idea what's going on over there. And they automatically discount any account coming from, not only coming from the Russians, who in general, when they put out official releases, they don't lie. They tell it more or less like it is. Sometimes they might ignore something. It might be a lie of omission, but they're not going to lie proactively like the Ukrainians have. Goes to Kiev, anybody? What I'm thinking at this time is that the Russians probably at this time, after the consolidation of the last few days, they seem to feel that they've got a firm grip on Ukraine Central and Ukraine East. They don't have the territory between Kiev and Kherson, Dnipropetrovsk, that area, but they don't need it, quite frankly, because it's just basically cows and wheat. Apart from Dnipropetrovsk, there's no army there. There's nothing vital there. There is the city of Dnipropetrovsk, but as you said, the war is not about cities; it's about armies. And the army is to the east. The army is surrounded. The other army or main group is in Kiev, setting up defenses to the city. There's also been a lot of talk of defenses going on up in Odessa, and everybody's saying that there's going to be an amphibious assault and all the rest of it. And then earlier today, first thing in the morning, the Russians launched I would call it a medium to small sized attack on the Lviv airport. They hit it with 6 cruise missiles that were apparently launched from the Black Sea from submarines. And these 6 cruise missiles destroyed some buildings in the Lviv airport. And Lviv is suddenly finally in this war because up to now the Russians have pretty much ignored it. And so my thinking is the following, that over the next 2 weeks, they'll probably start hitting with strategic strikes different military targets in the Lviv, Ivano-Frankivsk area. And once they have full consolidation of the east, that is, once they have either captured or annihilated or melted away the main army in east, I think that's when they're going to move west. And I think that their thrust is going to be to capture Lviv. And I think that they're going to get to Lviv, say, mid-April. And after maybe a couple of weeks of siege, they'll have it by the end of April. And that will be the effective end of the war, assuming, of course, that NATO doesn't enter the fray. And I think that they're going to completely ignore Odessa because there's nothing in Odessa worth fighting over. So I think that what they're going to do, because they don't need Odessa as a port, because they have one, and now they control the isthmus to the mainland from Crimea because they have Kherson. So Odessa strategically means nothing. There's nothing in Odessa. And so if they just bypass it, and once they have Lviv, Odessa is going to fall without a shot. I mean, what's the last remnants of the Ukrainian armed force in Odessa? What are they going to do? Nothing. So they'll just surrender. And I think that is going to be the end of the war. And I expect it to be the end of April. What do you guys think of that?
Well, this is the one point where, as I said, I'm not sure that they're going to go all the way to Lviv. I'm somewhat skeptical about this because, I mean, I've never obviously been to these places, but I've understood that, this part of Ukraine really is, hostile territory to them, and it is very, very close to Europe and to NATO. And I wonder whether they would want to go all that way. That's the one thing that's the one point of difference between us. Scott Ritter, by the way, about whom I've got much to tell you afterwards. He's very receptive to what you've been seeking, by the way, I should quickly say. But anyway, Scott Ritter is of the same view as you. He too thinks they're going to go all the way to Lviv.
I always tell you, great minds think alike.
That's what he said to me when I last spoke with him. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
It's a friendly wager,
exactly. But about Odessa,
none of us can do anything about it one way or the other.
About Odessa, I'm going to make a number of observations. I think this is a city that has enormous resonance in the Russian mind for all kinds of reasons. It's been a major cultural center. It's been very much a topic. It's a theme of Russian literature. Sort of gangsters of Odessa are very much part of Russian literature and Russian folklore. I mean, it's a city that, for me, from what I've understood about this, it has a sort of Chicago plus New Orleans quality about it from a Russian point of view. It's also, so I understand, I've never been there, an extremely beautiful place, and with a lot of historic architecture. I think the Russians would be extremely unwilling to get themselves involved in some sort of massive battle for Odessa, which could cause that place structural damage, incalculable damage. Exactly.
By the way, quick parenthesis. Did you notice how they put sandbags around the statue there?
Oh, no,
That showed that they truly care about their city. It's not just a collection of stones and statues. No, exactly. And I was extremely impressed by that. But I'm so sorry, I cut you off.
I know, I completely agree. I totally agree with that. My own personal view, however, is that if the army in eastern Ukraine collapses, I think resistance in Kiev itself will collapse very fast. And once Kiev collapses, frankly, there is nothing. The whole the whole political structure, the superstructure, not maybe not the underlying superstructure, but the people at the very top, the whole thing that holds the thing together will just implode. And I think that if there's going to be a climactic battle, well, the climactic battle is going to be in Donbass, and then everything else will fall like the fruit off the ripe fruit off the tree. That's my own personal view.
Odessa does have one strategic importance, I think, which is perhaps a way to connect to Transnistria. So there is,
but in the scheme of things, I mean, think of it. You're Putin. You're the Kremlin leadership, the military leadership. Why get involved to potentially damage Europe?
No, I don't. Yeah, I agree. I don't think they're going to damage it.
It's like,
no. I agree. I don't think they want to damage it, but I think it is an important city for strategic reasons as well. Yeah, but what do you guys think about the rumors that there's going to be a ceasefire and they're going to come to a solution, mainly coming out of Turkey and following the talks between Putin and Erdogan and Blinken? Blinken made a comment as well where he said, for the first time I've heard him say that he sees a way to resolve the conflict, which is interesting coming from the man who was pushing this conflict from the get-go. I think Blinken sees the writing on the wall as well. But
I think you've answered the question.
I want to answer that so bad. I'll tell you what I think. That the Russians are just stringing everybody along. They have no intention whatsoever of coming to any kind of diplomatic solution. Their solution is regime change and a very Russia-friendly regime in Ukraine, and quite frankly, the breaking up of Ukraine into at least 3 parts, possibly as many as 5. I mean, I'm just convinced of this, because think of the manpower that they have lost, the equipment that they have lost, the whole sanctions. And Putin is going to say, oh, okay, then we'll have a little diplomatic solution and we'll sign a piece of paper and we'll all go home. No, that's just no. I mean, once you play for the big stakes, you're not going to go home with a couple of chips. No, you want the whole pot. You know what I mean? And so I think that Putin talking about any kind of diplomatic solution, he's just stringing them along. And the West talking about a diplomatic solution, it's just wishful thinking. And it's also, a knowledge from satellite photography that it's over in Ukraine. It's done. Okay. It's like they say, it's all over but the shouting. And it's going to take time. It's not going to happen tomorrow. But the Eastern Army, once it collapses, it's going to that news is going to zip through the entire country when the Eastern armies collapse. And once that happens, everybody, all the soldiers are going to start to desert. And that's a fact, because what you have to understand, especially in a society that is cosmopolitan like Ukraine, when people realize that there's no point in fighting anymore, and it's not a honor-based society like a lot of societies in the Middle East where they will fight to the last man. No. Here, what will happen is that they'll realize it's pointless to fight. I'm not going to die for this, or these people, or these leaders. I'm going to leave. And I think that you're going to have high rates of desertion. And I think that the resistance in Kiev is just going to crumble internally once the main army is lost, one way or the other. I personally, as a human being and as a man and as a person who cares about Ukraine, I hope that they surrender. Because I don't want to see them die. It's needless, pointless. But one way or the other, once that army falls, and it will fall one way or the other, it's just inevitable at this point, that's when the whole thing falls. And finally, on the Lviv question, my thinking, and I'd love to talk to Scott Ritter about this, is that the Russians have reserves. They have plenty of reserves. And I would think it would be smart to deploy those reserves to Lviv in this collapsing Ukraine, to have a fresh fighting force there on the border with Poland, to make it clear, we're not going to cross the border, but you better not come our way either. I mean, I think that would be the sensible thing, and to bring out their A team to be on that point in Lviv. And finally, I want to mention something that I have heard from multiple sources. I cannot confirm 100%, but it might be true. There's a consistent rumor that Zelensky is no longer in Ukraine even. And I heard that from donkey's ears, right? from the start of this conflict.
Yeah.
But a lot of the evidence and a lot of people pointing out different things are saying he's not there anymore. And this whole meeting between Kaczynski, the deputy prime minister, and the other guys from Slovenia and Croatia, they're saying that all happened
Czech Republic.
in Poland. Sorry, Czech Republic.
Yeah.
That this all happened in Poland, just across the border from Ukraine.
Yeah.
What have you gentlemen heard of this?
Well, I've heard the same rumors, which I cannot remotely corroborate one way or the other. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, that's all I think I can say about that. Yeah, go on.
No, I mean, Helmer's article is the only thing that I can cite.
Right.
That's my only source.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
it seemed very compelling. And look, prima facie, it just seems insane that they would go all the way to Kiev, okay, for this meeting in the middle of a war. I mean, I certainly, as the president of any of these countries or a major figure in these countries, I would not allow my deputy prime minister or whomever to go into a war zone. I think that's insane. And so that's why I don't really believe the story that they went to Kiev. They might have gone to Lviv, but this whole notion that they never even crossed the border into Ukraine and that Zelensky himself is and has been in Poland this whole time or quite some time, I find that I don't know what to think of it. I think it's interesting. But you guys, you think it's still at this time a rumor, because that's what I think it is.
I wouldn't. Yeah, I would put it no further than a rumor, but it's not. It's not. I wouldn't say it's an impossible thing. My own personal guess, actually, is that Zelensky moves around. I think he's had one or two press conferences which have actually been in Kiev, but of course that doesn't mean he's there all the time. And I think that's an important thing to say. And I certainly think that the US would not want him to fall into Russian hands. So that would be.
Alexander, can I ask you a question? Do the Russians want him though? I mean,
no,
we made the point last time that the Russians don't want to, take on the leadership of another country. Obviously, they see it as, I mean, I don't want to say taboo, but they saw what happened to Gaddafi. Yeah. They saw all these things happen. They don't want to go that route. I mean, I would imagine, I think you're right. He probably can move around freely. I would imagine the Russians want it that way, for lack of a better word, because they want him around.
Absolutely.
I don't know if I'm off base there, but
I don't think you are, because I don't think they're intimidated or I don't think they see him. I don't think they see Zelensky himself as a serious adversary. So, I mean, they've got no incentive to do anything to him. If this is, and by the way, this is just my own comment. If the Poles and the Czechs and the Slovenes did go all the way to Kiev by that train, I'm absolutely sure that it would have been cleared with the Russians.
Oh yeah, no question.
So that is a point to perhaps bear in mind. But I have to say, I thought that whole incident, that whole episode, was a very, very odd one. I think it was partly in. Go on.
Go ahead, Alexander. You said it was partly.
I think it was partly an attempt to try to. Zelensky had been saying all sorts of things about NATO, about Ukraine leaving, not joining NATO, and I think that caused some concern, and I think the need was to send people to meet Zelensky, to bring him back on message, basically, because he gets off message very, very easily when he has things scripted for him, as he did for the speech to the Congress. Well, that's one thing. He reads his lines, but sometimes when he doesn't have his lines written for him, he goes off message. And I think this is partly an intention, was to try to get him back on message more than anything else.
What do you guys think of his speech?
Just one very last point about that incident of the leaders. Interestingly enough, it didn't get much coverage in Britain. And yesterday, for the first time since the start of the war, for a fairly lengthy period during the day, it stopped being the lead story in the British media. The Financial Times, which has been, perhaps the most heavy newspaper that's covered the war most intensively, it was actually leading for most of yesterday with a story about a ferry company, a British ferry company, which has laid off 800 workers. So that was very strange, and that suggests to me that there's an awful lot of intensive briefing going on.
It seems that they're getting ready to cut their losses on Ukraine.
I think so. That's how I feel about it. Yeah.
I mean, that's what I hope desperately, that they cut their losses, because the only thing that these people know how to do is either cut their losses or double down. And at this stage, doubling down means war, NATO war with Russia, which would be catastrophic for Ukraine, which is something that I personally would be, completely against, of course. No, what I wanted to argue, I wanted to get your opinion of what you thought of the speech he gave to Congress, because I thought it was kind of like an insane speech. Yeah. I mean, he tried to hit every emotional button that he could think of. 9/11, Martin Luther King. I mean, Pearl Harbor. I mean, he was just like, it was like, like he just like a list of American traumas. Let's hit every one of them and see which one works.
If I could quote Alexander, whoever thinks that Zelensky or his team actually wrote that speech, well, I have a bridge to sell you.
Oh, okay. Yeah. You guys talked about it before.
Yeah, that speech was, I mean, it was completely scripted for him somewhere in Hollywood or a DC think tank, period, including the propaganda video he put together, or they put together. It was scripted. I don't think there's any doubt about it. When Zelensky's talking about MLK and I Have a Dream, come on, man.
Which I have to say made the whole thing, though, look extremely weird. Because it was. I mean, that was the impression. That was my feeling about it. The whole thing felt completely unreal. Now, Gonzalo, you have much more experience of scripts and film sets and things like this, but this whole thing looked to me, it didn't look like a real thing. It looked.
The question should be asked to Gonzalo.
Gonzalo.
I mean, this is your
province,
your expertise.
Yeah, but lousy acting and bad lighting.
No, I mean, seriously, do you think it was scripted? Do you think? I mean, serious question.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was. This
is coming from an expert.
Yeah, no, it's scripted by people who are desperate. Okay. Desperate people, and of course, the script didn't make any kind of logical sense, because if you're doing so well in your war, you're not like freaking out and begging people to join in your war. If you're carrying on the good fight and really sticking it to the Ruskies, then you want help, sure, but you can handle it. You have that self-confidence. There was no self-confidence here at all. There was desperation and panic, and so it was a ridiculous speech. And look, the whole thing is over. And here's a thought I want to bring to the table. Ihor Kolomoisky, the oligarch, is the one who installed Volodymyr Zelensky, the actor, as president. That's the one who brought him there, brought him to the party. Now, right now, his date, if you want to call it that, are the neo-fascists, thugs, goons, whatever you want to call them, who are in Ukraine, and the SBU crowd, the secret police crowd. They're the ones running Zelensky at this time, and he is their puppet. Kolomoisky, he split to Switzerland, and he's long gone. And the word is that he's trying to cut a separate peace with the Russians, so that he can go back to Ukraine eventually, to Dnipro, which is his hometown. And the Russians are playing hardball with him, but that doesn't matter. Right now, Zelensky is the puppet of these gangsters. Now, let me ask you the following question. And this is just it's something I just thought of as we were talking now. This guy is an actor. He's a puppet. He's been a puppet of two different groups so far. Would you put it past Putin to determine, we'll keep on Zelensky, the puppet, and surround him with our guys. And we'll just keep on pulling the strings on Zelensky as the figurehead, as the puppet, while our guys, first of all, get rid of all these goons and these thugs and these criminals. You can get rid of them, I mean, like in a permanent way, in the 9mm way, and get rid of all these people, install our guys, and keep on with the Zelensky puppet for continuance of government's sake, and sign an agreement with Zelensky, a ceasefire agreement. But it's really like we're signing an agreement with ourselves, kind of thing, and he's just the puppet playing the other side. You see what I'm saying?
No, I think that's absolutely. I think that actually has been at one point. I think that was at one point certainly the Russian plan, and it's a plan which I think they're still prepared to work with. Keep Zelensky in place, recreate the government below him. That means that since he's the legitimate president of Ukraine in the eyes of the outside world, then any agreements they reach with him can't very easily be criticized by the Western powers. And if they agree a deal with him, they can put it forward to the Security Council of the United Nations. And then if that's backed by Zelensky, what does the West do? Does they go against the deal that Zelensky himself is endorsing? So I think that is an option, and I think that's still there at the back of their minds. I have to say, though, I think that they also probably are coming to the realization that Zelensky would be an extremely difficult person to control in that way. I think they would, if they did it, it would only be for a short time, and I think that very quickly they would shovel him off and bring in somebody that they saw as more steady and more reliable. So I there is another factor as well, which is that I get the very strong impression that Putin personally doesn't like Zelensky at all. I mean, obviously they've never met, but I mean, I think I think he has a general animus towards Zelensky.
He thinks he's a drug addict.
Surprising, exactly. Well, which is
look, because he is. We're all grown-ups. And so, I think that's what he objects to. And I suspect that, getting the vibe of Putin, he despises that lack of discipline. Okay?
Yes.
It's one of those guys who's like, it's perfectly fine to get drunk once in a while, but quietly when nobody's around, not in public, and certainly not be taking drugs, not in public, especially. So anyway, but it's just a notion that it would make life very easy for the Russians if they had a puppet like Zelensky. And the thing is, it can give this illusion that that Zelensky is the president, and therefore the ceasefire and the withdrawal and everything is hunky-dory kind of thing.
Yes.
But I don't know if Putin would not really go for that, because it might be an illusion that would be a little bit too effective, and people in Russia would say, "Oh, so you lost in Ukraine." You see the. I don't know. It's a delicate thing, because to oust Zelensky outright, to take Kiev and just kick him to the curb, and put in anybody else, the rest of the world is going to say, "Oh, it's the illegitimate government." So it's this problem that I have no doubt that Putin has a solution already in mind. So I'm kind of curious to see what that solution is going to look like.
Bear in mind, there's a particular event which the Russians are very, very familiar with, and which is often discussed in Russia, which is what happened in Afghanistan in 1979, when they did go in and they did actually overthrow and kill the president. They kept the rest of the government going, but they killed the president and replaced him with someone else. And that meant that the rest of the world said this is a illegitimate invasion. Whatever deal was done is wrong, and the government has been changed, even though actually all the personnel below were actually retained. And that was massively, massively damaging diplomatically for the Russians. So that's a reason for keeping Zelensky in place if they can, but it might not be that easy. And of course, I suspect a lot of it will depend on how events on the ground shape up and what Zelensky himself does. If the military in the east collapses, and assuming he's not in Poland already, let's say he's in Kiev, he might flee to Lviv, he might flee from Lviv to Poland, he might end up in the west, in which case obviously there's very little that the Russians can do. On the contrary, if he remains in Kiev, then maybe we could start to see some of these scenarios that you've discussed shape themselves out. They would be entirely in character for the Russians to work with in that respect. And by the way, about this having a negative effect on public opinion in Russia, I don't think it would. I think Russians are, on this sort of thing, they're a very, very sophisticated public, if you like. I think they understand.
They'd see through it.
Exactly. They would understand exactly what the Kremlin was doing.
if Zelensky didn't bolt to Poland right when this started, and if he is in Kiev, or if he was in Kiev for an extended period of time, the Russians, if they wanted him, they would have gotten to him. And if he's still in Kiev, if they want him, they would have gotten to him. There is no way in hell that the Russians would not be able to get to Zelensky if he was in Ukraine. So if he is in Ukraine, it's the Russians that want to keep him there. And I believe if he is in Kiev and the Russians want to keep him there, it's probably because the Russians understand that they're not really negotiating with Zelensky anyway. And they're probably saying, let him go around and make his speeches and play his role. It doesn't matter anyway, because we're really negotiating with the US, and our goal is denazification, demilitarization, and to create a European security guarantee that we can live with. So we're not really looking for Zelensky's okay. And maybe they're looking to keep Zelensky in place because they would like a legitimate handoff of a new government instead of Yanukovych coup d'etat type of scenario. That's if he's in Kiev. And I say that to both of you, Gonzalo and Alexander, because we've done shows and we've talked about what happened in Kazakhstan recently, where the Russians effectively, they went in, they swapped out the leaders real quick, and it was over. So, if the Russians really wanted to do something with the leadership, they would have done it. And that's all under the premise that he's in Kiev. Maybe he bolted on the first day and left, and the Russians couldn't get to him. That's a different story.
I mean, the reason we're talking about all of this is, of course, we already see the end stage of this, that the Russians are going to win. And so the issue becomes, how do you square the circle of bringing everything back into the fold? And I insist that I do not believe that the Russians will allow Ukraine to continue to exist in the current geographical shape that it has. I just don't see that happening. And I think that quite frankly, and I think a lot of Ukrainian listeners, if they hear me say this, would be upset with me, but I think it's the truth. Ukraine would probably be much better off if it were broken up into smaller countries that were ethnically homogenous, and these broken up smaller versions of Ukraine, Novorossiya, New Ukraine, call them what you will. I think that they would all be happier long term, and more prosperous, and just better overall than the smorgasbord that we currently have, which is it's falling apart as we speak. So that's my thinking, and I'm really wanting to figure out what the Russians are thinking, because they must have a vision. Because they don't do something like this without a clear sense of what they see the end picture, and they must have it in mind, and it must be very simple and straightforward. And I guess I'm impatient. I want to know how the story ends. You know what I mean? If it were a book, I'd flip to the last 10 pages.
Well, I think you're right, and so would I. At the moment, the Russians are playing with their cards very close to their chest. And on the point of the negotiations, I think that to some extent they are stringing the Ukrainians along. Of that, there's no question. But I think also negotiations serve a useful purpose, because if the Ukrainians start saying things that the Russians can work with, then the Russians might take that and start building on it. So if Ukraine suddenly becomes serious about the fact that it's not going to join NATO, and I think the Russians are very cynical about what the Ukrainians are saying on this, but if the Ukrainians come up with some serious proposal, then the Russians will take it, and then they'll come back and ask for more. But I come back to what I was going to say. I mean, we've had a telephone conversation yesterday between Erdogan and Putin was implacable. He's not yielding on a single one of the demands that he made at the end of February, which strongly suggests to me that he's expecting things to end with all his demands fulfilled. And what I'm getting from his speech today, it's exactly the same. I don't get the sense that he's pulling back or modifying his views, or is in any way feels that he's under any pressure to.
All right. Alexander, Gonzalo, before we get to questions, I have a question for both of you guys. Gonzalo, you kind of did a video on this on your channel, so I think you'll have a lot to say about this, and I'm curious to hear what Alexander says. Given the news that we're getting from the Western mainstream media, it's obvious that Russia is losing this war. And I've heard reports saying that the Russian military has, at best, maybe 8 to 10 days left. And this is coming from serious, and I say that serious sources like the New York Times and the Washington Post, as well as Pentagon
they
generals.
always tell the truth.
Yeah,
They always tell the truth.
Yeah, I know, that's why I'm saying. But anyway, okay, it's coming from the paper of record, and so let's discuss it. And we are hearing this from their sources inside the Pentagon as well, which are saying that the Russian military is in disarray. The latest number of fatalities that the New York Times claims for the Russian military is 7,000 dead and 25,000 injured. And Putin is desperately looking for a way out of this. He's looking for a negotiated settlement.
Desperate.
Alexander and Gonzalo convinced me that Russia is not losing this war and that Putin is not in a state of desperation to try and wind this war down with an agreement.
Well, I will go on. Gonzalo, you go first.
Okay. I was going to say that I was talking just before this conversation with a friend in Moscow, and she was crying because she was looking out the window and there was the ghost of Kiev flying across the sky and spelling out with the contrails of the ghost of Kiev's jet, surrender or die in Russian. And she was like, what do we do? What do we do? It's nonsense. It's nonsense and wishful thinking. It's the most absurd kind of wishful thinking, because you see, an adult looks at reality, distasteful though that reality may be, unhappy though it may make you, but you look at the facts and reality. And the thing I see in this war, because of cell phones and their camera and video, that's so easy to film and upload into the internet and be spread far and wide before any censor can get to it. We have seen people on the ground filming their little town in Ukraine or wherever, showing some Russian tank rolling by and the Russian soldiers deploying and taking over the town, okay? And we know for a fact that it is that town because we can look at the Google Maps and see how the landmarks on Google Maps correspond to the picture. And so we know it's true, okay? And this is indisputable fact, indisputable fact, rather. And so this notion that the Russians are losing, it's just wishful thinking. And it's something that I personally find, a couple of days ago, I had a moment when I thought to myself, am I wrong? Because it was so insistent that the Russians were just getting demolished and destroyed. And I am here in the city in Kharkov, and I have been hearing for the last week as the shelling gets closer every day. I mean, I'm hearing it, I'm seeing it. It's not, the reports, but the reports are saying something.
The reports say Russians have stalled. I mean, that is
the
other side
thing,
is,
of course,
the Western mainstream media. They're saying the Russians have stalled in Kharkiv, or they've stalled in Kiev because the Ukraine army has been effectively repelling them or counterattacking them.
And the answer to that is very simple. The answer to that is extremely simple. See, the Russians went into this war with a desire to maintain the civilian infrastructure at all costs. The fact that I'm talking to you now on the internet with electricity, running water, cell, everything, heating, most especially of all of it working in a city that has been, dealing with the Russian invaders for the past couple of weeks, that should prove that the Russians have no intention of demolishing the city the way the Americans would, for instance. And so that kind of operation takes more time. And so this notion that a lightning war, quote unquote, is going to be over in 2 days, it's absurd. That's, again, it's a childish mentality. When we look at this war a year from now, and this war will likely be over by the end of April, as I discussed before, well, we're going to say, man, that was fast. It only took them 2 months. Okay? Because it is fast. It's extraordinarily fast, especially the way that they are conducting the war. As I said from the beginning, that offended a lot of Ukrainians, but it's true. The Russians have been tiptoeing into the country. They have been trying not to smash everything or anything at all. And so this absurd notion, it bothers me because it's an unwillingness to look at reality. And I think that is a crucial problem of the West. And the West has been rich enough for a long time to pretend that the problems that it has are not real problems. But now the wealth of the West is exhausted. the United States is over indebted to the tune of basically 200% of GDP if you add up all the debt, federal, state, local, and agency. And so you start to realize that the United States is bankrupt. The European Union is not far better off. Their moment is over, and they are still pretending because they had the riches to throw money at problems and keep on pretending, as opposed to facing the problems and trying to solve them. And I guess that's why it annoys me so much, and that's why it makes me so just generally pissed off.
Yeah. Okay. I have found these reports that have been circulating in the West, I find them frankly sinister. To my mind, they're intended for two purposes. One is to encourage the Ukrainians themselves, to make the Ukrainians, I mean the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian soldiers, to make them think that they're winning so that they can keep on fighting. You don't want them to think that they're losing, because of course if they did think that, then they might start doing the things that Gonzalo was talking about, like go home, give up, surrender, do all those sort of things. So I think that's one purpose of all of this. The other, obviously, is to some extent to demoralize the Russians and to create problems and concerns in Russia. And by the way, that figure of 7,000 people killed and 25,000 injured, I looked at the methodology that had been put together, and it's not even methodology. It's, you see a picture of a armored vehicle, you count the number of people that you think are probably usually in an armored vehicle like that. You then take all the figures of all the armored vehicles that the Ukrainians say they've taken out. You then multiply it again by the number of soldiers that these armored vehicles carry, and then you come up with a figure. I mean, it was. I'm not exaggerating, by the way. It was that kind of. It was that kind of back of the envelope calculation.
Westmoreland-esque.
Yeah,
Westmoreland-esque.
Exactly. It has no fundamental basis, but as I said, it's partly intended to inspire the Ukrainians to keep on fighting, and it's partly obviously intended to create demoralization amongst the Russians and to feed rumors in Russia that this thing isn't going well and that thousands of people have been killed and tens of thousands have been injured and that sort of thing. The other thing it's intended to do, and Peskov, who is the Putin's spokesman, has actually complained about it. He said that it's a transparent attempt to goad the Russians into attacking the cities. Precisely what they have been saying from day one that they didn't want to do. So if you look at all of these things about the Russian offensive having stalled, it's stalled. The reason is given is that they haven't actually captured any particular city, but of course they might have chosen not to. That may be because their tactic is completely different. That their focus is on what's going on in Donbass, and here, of course, we have. It's not easy to obtain, but we have an enormous amount of information from the ground, which tells a completely different story of Mariupol, the noose tightening, as the Russian Ministry of Defense says, of Severodonetsk about to fall. Apparently, an important town in that part of the world has now fallen, which has tightened the entrapment, and of a general Ukrainian military that is finding itself increasingly under pressure and encircled. And I think, there's fog of war, there's disinformation, there's propaganda. All of this is a normal part of war. It's not easy to sift through all the things that people are saying. But I think that these comments are clearly disinformation. They're part of a disinformation exercise. I think they're partly, as I said, intended to inspire the Ukrainians, demoralize the Russians, and goad the Russians into doing things that they wouldn't want to do. And I think the Russians are not going to fall for it.
Well, last thing, I completely agree with you, Alexander. But the other thing I wanted to mention that Alex wanted me to mention before, I realized now that I didn't bring up, but I think that the propaganda, the Western propaganda, wants to give the impression that Russia is on the back foot, militarily speaking, so that if there is a chemical attack, it'll be easy to blame the Russians and say, see, they were losing, and that's why they used chemical weapons. And I think that might be part of the strategy, the communication strategy. Because the whole notion of a false flag, that deeply troubles me. because
Yes.
apart from the political consequences of such a false flag, you see, you're talking about using chemicals, chemical
Yeah.
weapons, because that's what it would really be, because it would be like really obvious.
Yeah.
And I don't think it would be like nuclear, because I don't think
No.
that you can hide a nuclear strike. Okay,
No.
but you can hide and smuggle in chemical weapons and deploy them in some place, killing a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people. We're talking thousands potentially. And so I find that deeply, deeply disturbing.
Yeah.
And that is why you're right. I mean, what you were saying, the sinister aspect of this lying. I look at it from the perspective of the West, in the sense that it's giving people a false sense of reality.
Yeah.
But they have a use for it. Look, bottom line, these people are evil. I mean, these people in the West, it's not that they are pursuing a goal that is actually beneficial to the West.
No.
It's a hatred of Russia that is just, wow. I mean, do you guys see what I'm saying? Because this is long ago stopped being for the benefit of the West.
Gonzalo, I completely agree with you. Can I just say it's the aspect of this affair that has shocked and dismayed me. I had not appreciated until this war began how widespread this visceral loathing of Russia really is. Are these sirens I can hear?
Yeah, that's air raid sirens. Sorry about that. But
no,
they go off kind of like at random, you know, and so it's just annoying at this point. But anyway, but they're down now. Sorry about that.
Yes. Okay.
Did you want to add anything to that, Alexander? Or should we?
No, I didn't.
I
mean, I just wanted to make that particular point. I think, as I said, I mean, I'm not saying that everything that the Russians have done has gone completely according to plan. You know, to quote Clausewitz again, every plan has to be modified following first contact with the enemy. I mean, that's a given in war. So obviously not everything has gone according to plan. But I have to say that these claims that one's reading about in the media in the West, which have been spread by Western officials, and by the way, the British Ministry of Defence is playing a major role in circulating these stories.
Yeah.
As I said, it clearly has a particular objective in mind. As I said, it's intended to encourage the Ukrainians to keep on fighting. It's intended to demoralize the Russians, and it's intended to goad the Russians into doing things that they are not going to do.
All right. We have a lot of questions, so let's run through them. But before we get started on the questions, Gonzalo, I forgot to ask you, where can people find you?
Yeah.
Oh, they can find me
who aren't already plugged into your channel.
Yeah, on my channel, Gonzalo Lira, and my Patreon and my Telegram. Yeah, check me out there. Shoot, I don't have the links handy. If you don't mind, I'll put them up there.
I'll look for them and I'll put them in the description. I'll look through them as we run through the questions. I'll get all of those together and I'll put them in the description box as well. So I highly recommend if you aren't already following Gonzalo, definitely follow him both on Telegram and on YouTube. I have to say they're the channels are connected, but they do give you different forms of information, which is good. Yeah. So definitely follow Gonzalo on both Telegram and YouTube. So do you guys want to run through the questions?
Yeah, that's it.
Our viewers have?
Yeah, I'm up for it.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, great. FBI Glowboy says, any thoughts on the curious timing of the proposed Israeli East Med gas pipeline being quashed by Biden only a few weeks prior to Russia moving on Ukraine? And why was the deal killed?
Alex, I'm not really familiar. I didn't know it had been killed. What do you make of this, Alex?
I haven't heard it's been killed, actually. I don't think the East Med pipeline is everything that people build it up to be. I know in Cyprus, it's not this thing that's going to solve all of Europe's energy needs. If anything, what the East Med pipeline does, maybe it solves the energy needs of the countries involved in this pipeline, i.e. it'll solve the domestic energy needs of Israel, that's for sure. It'll solve the domestic energy needs of Cyprus, Egypt, other countries, but it's not going to be this pipeline is going to replace Russian energy, for example. That's not going to happen. And this thing's been delayed for like 15 years. I mean, this has been going on and on and on for a long, long time.
Yeah.
So that's my thought on that. I don't think it's as big as people are building it up to be.
Yeah, I agree.
It'll be big for Cyprus and Israel. Yeah, it'll be good
Yeah.
for those countries and Egypt. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But for Europe, all right. Let's see here. Let me pull up some more questions that we can run through. From Sidebar VR says the U.S. wants Russians to revolt, but Americans cannot even get its government to not go over budget. Don't even mention making an election to run smoothly.
True enough.
Very true.
The mood in Russia is as far from revolt as it's possible to get. It's causing a consolidation. That's the reality of it.
Yeah.
Eurogabor
Putin is
said,
locked in. Yeah, Putin is locked in tight. And let's assume, for the sake of argument, that things work out and there isn't NATO war and nothing really unpredictable happens. He's locked into the end of his life. He's the guy. I don't see anybody being able to push him off his ledge. He's the guy.
Eurogabor says, on Thursday's NATO summit, Poland will request the deployment of NATO peacekeeping troops to Ukraine. Czech and Danish governments are already on board. Norway just launched a huge rearmament program.
Yes. I gather that Germany has categorically ruled it out, and I'm beginning to get the sense that that's going to stick. I'm also getting the sense that Germany has buyer's remorse over many of the sanctions it maneuvered itself into ordering.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. By the way, if you're talking about a NATO peacekeeping force, I understand that under the Washington Treaty, in fact, I've read the Washington Treaty, I mean, it would require authorization by the UN Security Council, which, for obvious reasons, isn't happening.
I mean, realistically, nobody's going to. These aren't piddly these aren't like piddly little countries. This is Russia we're talking about.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, I mean, if it were like, I don't know, a couple of countries in Africa, okay, yeah, sure, peacekeepers.
Yeah.
But here, no, come on.
Yeah, I agree.
John, thank you for that super chat. Thank you very much, John. And Fabian, thank you for that super sticker. And Kaliu25 says, I'm starting a petition to give Zelensky the Oscar this year. Would you sign it? Would you guys sign that petition? He's nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize.
I think he's a terrible actor. I mean, he's played his role abominably. This is my own personal view. If I'm going to assess it as an acting skill, I mean, I don't think he's I don't think he's a good actor in this thing. I don't know what you feel, Gonzalo. This is
he's a horrible actor. Horrible actor.
Yeah,
it's Roger Corman here.
Yeah, absolutely. That puts it rather well, I think.
Radar
he gave
Bar
it to Obama of all people, and
exactly
look what he did with it.
Yeah, exactly. Look what he did. Radar says, can you get Matthias Desmet on, who can explain the mass formation of the Western public that is happening now?
That'd be interesting.
That'd be interesting. Yeah, we'll try. The West, RD says, the West framing everything as a historical battle between liberal and anti-liberal makes it unable to understand foreign historical divisions.
So true. Absolutely true. I mean, there's a lot of truth. Go on.
Yeah.
Go on, Alexander.
No, what I was saying is that, with Putin's speech, the Empire of Lies speech, which he gave on the 25th or 24th of February, I always forget.
Yeah.
And the speech he gave yesterday, basically turning his back on the West.
Yeah.
And what the Chinese have been saying of rejecting liberal values and the lies and corruption and manipulation and all the rest of it, we really are seeing a cultural shift. It's not just an economic bloc that is cutting itself away from the West. It really is a cultural bloc. And if this cultural bloc can start to clearly articulate its values, in opposition to Western liberalism. And let's face the facts. Yesterday there was this swim meet in the United States for the swimming championship of a women's swimming championship, and this transsexual person, Leah Thomas or Thompson or something like that, an individual born a man. And clearly a man, he's like 6'3" or 6'4". I mean, he towers over the competition. He beat the second fastest female swimmer by 5 seconds. And they're saying, oh, woman is a woman. And you're like, what are you talking about? What insanity is this? And I think that a lot of people in the rest of the world who are paying attention to such things look at this and say, yeah, this is insanity. And a lot of people, sensible people, in the West, let alone in China and Russia, look at this in horror and say, we want no part of it. I certainly look at it in horror, and I find it disgusting because it's just again denial of reality. And I think that the cultural framework that the China-Russia alliance is creating in opposition to Western liberal values is extremely powerful. It could potentially be extremely attractive, not just to the people in China and Russia, but also to people in the West. And you might be surprised of how many people, if we come to an era of relative peace and things calm down, and there is a clear coalescing of cultural visions, you'd be surprised how many people in the West will decide to leave the West and go to Russia, China, and establish themselves in this new cultural norm, which they feel is more humane, more normal, if you will, more sane. You see what I'm saying? Because the West really is going insane on a cultural level. That's what I see. That's how I see it. I don't know how you gentlemen see it.
I'm going to say, I agree with you, but I'm going to add something else, Gonzalo. I mean, this is what we're going through over the last couple of weeks. It means that attention has been focused in the West on Ukraine, Russia, big economic things, but the culture war within the West in reality continues unabated, and in just a few months' time we'll be back to that in the West too.
Yeah, I agree. Jason says, thanks for all that you do on all your channels. The alternative perspective is valued. Thank you very much, Jason. And Fiat says, after watching Putin's latest speech on 3/17, I got the feeling they're using this event moment as a launching pad for a whole new beginning, or at least that's the message I received. Did you see that as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I saw it too. And by the way, just to say, I mean, you may have noticed something. I mean, the Russian central bank has now been issuing all kinds of things, and they're also talking about a period of transition. And by the way, they're being very optimistic. They think that 2022 there'll be some fall in GDP in the first couple of months, but then things will stabilize. They also predict inflation will be back to 4% by 2024. So a very, very short period of transition, it would seem. But they seem to be thinking about a transition as well.
All right, Deborah, thank you for that super chat. Elaine, thank you for that super chat. And Imra says, when KFC left Crimea, it was quickly replaced with CFC, Crimea Fried Chicken. Is that true?
Well, I'm sure it is. I mean,
I'm asking, is that true? Yeah,
could be. I mean, Regis Tremblay, who I'm in touch with, was the person who confirmed that. He lives there. But what I was simply going to say is this: we've discussed this before. The kind of businesses that are going to be affected by the cutoff from the West, the kind of businesses in Russia that get supplies from the West. We're not talking any longer about the big high-tech industrial chains. I mean, the things like the Rostec Corporation and its various parts. I mean, they've been working for import substitution for a long time. Agriculture works, again, largely on Russian products, and that's why it works the way it does. If you're talking about consumer goods industries, that's the most flexible part of the economy. I know, I've worked in it. I mean, I've seen how quickly these sort of industries can adapt.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, completely right.
Let's see. FBI Glow Boy says, morning, gentlemen. I ask this genuinely, not as an anti-Semitic dog whistle. What, if any, is Israel's role in this? And thoughts on curious timing of canceling Israeli East Med gas pipeline to EU 1 month before Russia? We answered that.
We did answer that. In Israel, interestingly, very quietly, is taking Russia's side. I mean, it's widely known. I think it's almost universally accepted that Bennett, the Israeli prime minister, advised Zelensky to accept Putin's demands.
Yeah.
And
we know that as fact. And
we know that it's fact. And the Israelis have said that, well, they'll enforce Western sanctions, US sanctions. They're not imposing any sanctions of their own.
Jane,
they're not going to go out of their way to enforce those American sanctions.
No.
I mean, if they perchance forget to enforce, nobody in Israel is going to throw a hissy fit over that, because they have long-standing ties to Russia. And between Russia and Ukraine, they'll side with Russia because it's just bigger, and there are more relationships and more money involved and longer ties. And it's just, that's the way it's going to be.
Exactly. Jane, thank you for that super sticker. Violin Merchant says the admin is so bad they can't even get globalism right.
True enough.
Okay, thank you. Naz says, good day. When Russia is victorious in its special operation, what do you think will happen to Zelensky and the neo-Nazis? Will this make the Nazi situation worse?
Well, I think with Zelensky, we basically already discussed this. I don't there's much more to say about that. I think if the Russians succeed in their special operation, which I firmly believe they will, then I'm afraid that particular movement in Ukraine is essentially ended. I mean, I think in central and eastern Ukraine, it has no future. If Western Ukraine breaks away in some form, well, I suppose it could survive there, but in central Ukraine and eastern Ukraine, it's over.
I think that the FSB is going to be deployed once they have the whole country firmly in hand, and they're going to persecute those people. Bottom line, and I think that's why they're fighting so fiercely in Mariupol and other pockets. They will fight to the last man, because they know that they have absolutely no future, and that they will be they will come to some very grim endings, because the Russians really hate them. I mean, the Nazis, they hate them with a passion. And so they will go whole hog. I mean, because it's not a LARP like in the West, where they say, J.K. Rowling, oh, she's a Nazi. No. In Russia, they really hate them, and they only use that for people who actually are that thing. And when they figure out that you are one of those, they're going to go after you. And so, I mean, God help those people, because the Russians are going to show no mercy. That's my thinking.
I agree.
Freedom Autopsy Report says Putin is a lawyer and his parents were NKVD officers in the Great Patriotic War. I would think that Putin is one smart, tough, and serious cookie.
I'm so all true.
I don't know if I don't think his parents were NKVD.
Well, I don't know about his mother. Certainly wasn't, because for one thing, she was a devout Christian. His father, before the war, was a naval officer, and then during the war, he enrolled in a special forces unit, which I understand came under the NKVD. But he was never he was never a secret policeman or anything of that kind.
Well, Putin himself never was either. He was a lawyer.
Nor was Putin, exactly. It was a temporary assignment during the Second World War.
Kurt says,
the whole notion that Putin is a KGB officer. I'm sorry, I meant to say that Putin was never. I said NKVD, but I meant KGB. No. But he was KGB, but he was a lawyer, and he was not involved in any kind of And I do suspect that for part of his appeal, he kind of like allowed people to think that he was some sort of James Bond figure, but he really wasn't. He was just a bureaucrat.
That is exactly correct. That is precisely right.
Kurt says, I made a calculation of the population in the 35 plus 5 UN countries who decided not to condemn Russia, and they represent 53% of the world's population.
Yes, it's absolutely true.
Okay, then. Yeah,
that's absolutely true. Can I add? It's fairly widely known that a lot of the countries that voted for the resolution did so very, very much under intense pressure. So I even read an article in the British media. I think it was the Guardian, in which they said that the Western powers were dismayed at how thin support for them at the level of the General Assembly actually turned out to be.
They don't realize how thin their support is, period. They don't realize that their attitudes for so long are the attitudes of the bully. And they think that people smile at them because they're genuinely happy to see them. And no, they're smiling at them, but they have a dagger behind their back, ready to strike out whenever they can. And the West and the Americans and the Europeans do not seem to see this. It's remarkable.
GEC812 says, chat, anyone have an Amazon Fire Stick TV? A Locals beta app recently released makes it much easier to watch the Duran Locals only video on your TV. I didn't know that.
Didn't know.
You can also check out durantv.com as well,
Absolutely.
where we stream our videos. Thank you, GEC812, for that. Thrillino, thank you for that super chat. 01 Lurias, thank you for the super sticker. Claude, thank you for the super sticker. Mr. Alexander says, do you know any other geopolitical YouTubers? Yes, we do. Gonzalo Lira.
Thank you very much.
And
Thank you.
And put your links, Gonzalo, in the description box as well, down below.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, there are a lot of good YouTube.
Yeah, absolutely. They are.
Content creators. I don't even want to say YouTube anymore. Content creators on various platforms.
Yeah.
Talk about geopolitics. Absolutely. Andrew Davies says, at the time of fragility and potentially catastrophic consequences, I'm anticipating Biden to call Xi and inquire to which dim sums he's serving today. Thank you, Ray, for that super sticker. Thank you for the super chat. Freedom Autopsy Report says, sending weapons to Ukraine is a military-industrial complex grift.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. Of course it is. Yeah.
Wolf Crew
So it's an
says,
incredibly bad idea, particularly the kind of weapons that you're
very
sending.
very bad idea. Wolf Crew says, if they leave Odessa too late, couldn't NATO strategically move in so they too have a base in the Black Sea? Interesting question.
Never happened. Never happened.
No, I don't think it's going to happen either, to be honest. I think again, the word I'm getting is that the Germans certainly wouldn't do it. I don't think the French would do it either, to be honest.
What, of Odessa? Like NATO invading Odessa? That would be suicidal. The Russians would chop them up before they even got to the coast.
Absolutely. I mean, bear something in mind that Erdogan has closed the straits. So that means that Western warships can't enter the Black Sea for the time being.
I think that the person
you'd have to send a ground force.
Yeah, I think that the person who's going to have a reckoning after this is all over is Erdogan. I think that he has played his cards very poorly, and now that the Chinese hate his guts over his participation in Kazakhstan, and I don't think that the Russians are really keen on him either. I think that, and the West doesn't trust him. I think that he has managed to play himself into a corner where he has no friends.
I agree. Can I just say something else about Erdogan? I think it's now absolutely clear that there were far more Bayraktar drones supplied to Ukraine than anybody had ever admitted to. I mean, the number of them that's been shot down already well exceeds, I think by multiples, the number that had been admitted.
Dead City says, does NATO already have a naval base in Romania?
I don't know, actually.
I don't think so. I think they've got some kind, not exactly a base, but I think they've got a facility there so that ships that enter the Black Sea can, refuel and, do R&R and all the things that, they have to do in Constanza. But I don't think it's a proper, fully functioning base.
Alexander, I refuse any Guardian stories. They are all plants propaganda. The news is total BS. The Guardian travel and lifestyle still charms me.
You are absolutely right. The only reason I ever read these articles in the Guardian, and it's a depressing thing to do, by the way, is simply because it does give you an insight into what the people who are planting these stories are up to. I mean, I already explained what
Kremlinology.
Exactly.
Kremlinology.
Yeah. All right. Real Lot No Sense says no naval base in Romania. They have a land base near Constanza. And Gennady says no naval base in Romania as well. And
very difficult to operate a naval base, for NATO to operate a naval base in the Black Sea. Can I just say, if you look at the Montreux Convention, I mean, if there was a crisis and Turkey were to close the straits, it would have to close the straits to American ships. And any American ships in the Black Sea would then become trapped in a sea which the Russians totally dominate. So I don't think it makes much sense, actually. Carry on.
Yeah, they can use Constanza and Mangalia ports.
Yes.
And Leafybug says, don't get complacent. Much of that support isn't worth a pinch of shit.
Absolutely true.
Very well said. And another... Gonzalo, stay active. How many sit-ups are you doing, Gonzalo? ?
Can we talk about something else, please? Let's talk about, I don't know, bond issuance, in Tasmania. I can talk about that if you want, but my sit-ups and my physical, no, I've been very bad, very bad.
Yeah. All right. Kurt Fram says Russia has no choice but to go to Lviv in West Ukraine because they need to prevent weapons floating into Ukraine through the borders of Poland.
I know that argument, and I think that's one of the most clear and good arguments I've seen about going to Lviv. As I said, I still have doubts about this, but I know what people like Gonzalo is saying, and as I said, Scott Ritter is of the same view.
Heyman says, what's the point of bluffing after the hand has been exposed? Any more chips we throw in would only maximize, not minimize our losses. Doubling down is a good strategy till you bankrupt what was endless.
Absolutely true. I mean, that's exactly right. But as I said many times, the great problem with the neocons and people like that is that they have no reverse gear.
Yeah, their pride. Hubris.
Yeah.
I mean,
hubris,
the Greeks invented, you gentlemen, you should know your culture here.
Oh,
the Greeks invented this concept for a reason. People fall for it all the time, and we're seeing it with the Americans. Yes.
Lon Baker says, cheers, gentlemen. Thank you for that. And Brian says, why do you think Zelensky addressed the Canadian Parliament in Ukrainian and Congress in English?
There are a lot of Ukrainians in Canada.
Yeah.
Faith Goldie, if you recall, a YouTuber, she's no longer active, but she's Ukrainian. And so there are a lot of Ukrainians in Canada. There are a lot of Ukrainians in the United States, too, in the Midwest, but their cultural identity has been subsumed. Yes. Whereas in Canada, they still retain a very strong sense of being Ukrainian.
Yeah.
Evgeny says, why is Romania so afraid of the Russians when they should be afraid of Turkey?
That's a very, very good question. In a word, Moldova, there's been this bitter dispute between Romania and Russia over the status of Moldova that goes back all the way to the 19th century. Moldova, as it was, in those days it was called Bessarabia, was conquered, was captured by the Russians from the Ottomans in the early 19th century at the time of the Napoleonic Wars. And it's been a Russian province ever since, or at least a Tsarist province, right up till the time of the collapse of the Russian Empire. It's a predominantly Romanian-speaking region, and I'm going to say it straightforwardly, very much a part of Romanian identity. I mean, there's an awful lot of Romanian identity that is connected with Moldova, Bessarabia as it was. Then in the interwar years, as a result of the collapse of the empire, Romania was able to unite itself to Bessarabia, Moldova. The Soviet Union never accepted that. They always considered Bessarabia or Moldova to be part of the Soviet Union. And then, of course, in the lead up to the Second World War, the Soviets reoccupied Bessarabia, created the Republic of Moldova. And this happened during the period of Soviet-German cooperation, following the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. And then after the end of the war, the Soviets took it back again. But this has always been a bitter issue in Romania, and it's always created problems between Romanians and Russians.
And where does Turkey fit in?
Well, of course, all of these regions. Romania was part of the Ottoman Empire. Mm-hmm. The Romanians, the Ottomans extended all the way up there. And of course, it was the Ottomans also who ruled Bessarabia, Moldova, until they were driven out of it by the Russians during the Napoleonic Wars at the time of Alexander I. So it was the Turks at that time who ceded Bessarabia to Russia. Now, what relations are between Romania and Turkey today, I have absolutely no idea. I mean, I generally don't know, but it could very well be that, there are these ancestral fears in Romania of Turkey. I'm not able to say anymore. And it is a case, of course, that the Russians have never ruled. There was a Soviet era, but I mean, they never made it a part of their empire, certainly during the Tsarist times. And there have been times when Romania and Russia have been on relatively good terms, but there's always been this issue of Bessarabia, Moldova, that has created tensions in the meantime. What the Turkish angle is, apart, as I said, that it was once the imperial power in Romania, I don't know.
Interesting. Tim Adamson says Viktor Medvedchuk escaped house arrest and is now missing. He could have been a great pick for president, but I fear they've taken him out. I have not heard that news.
I've not heard that news, and that's very, very worrying.
No.
Worrying and or intriguing at the same time. We'll see.
Interesting. Rita says, you guys are such a treasure. Thanks for having Gonzalo on as a guest again.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for that kind compliment. And thank you, gentlemen, for having me on.
It's our honor and our pleasure, Gonzalo.
Sure. Mr. Kaikong, thank you for that super sticker. Smug Buddha says, what about the CIA reserves that were supposed to launch the insurgency?
Well, we've not seen very much of that. By the way, I'm going to say something, which is that if you look at these weapon systems that Biden authorized for Ukraine, they are really the kind of weapon systems, anti-tank missiles and man-pads and kamikaze drones, which look better suited to an insurgency than to a conventional army. And it's been suggested to me that part of the purpose is to try to interfere with Russian communications. But anyway, that seems to be the sort of overall plan. I don't see much evidence of an insurgency at the moment, I have to say. I mean, I haven't seen any evidence at all. I don't know whether Gonzalo can enlighten us, but certainly there's been no great uprising against the Russians in any of the areas that they control.
No, there hasn't, and especially because the Russians have, in general, and this is just from video evidence, but they seem to be very civil towards the civilian population. They're not abusing them, and also the Russians speak the same language.
Yeah,
and so it's it's very easy to have an insurgency against somebody who's clearly a foreign power.
Yeah.
But it's much harder to have an insurgency against somebody that you kind of like think, he's kind of like a cousin,
Yeah.
And he's not trying to hurt me. He's not trying to hurt my mother or my grandmother.
No.
He's a soldier here with this army that's occupying my town, but he's not really trying to screw with my situation.
Yeah.
I mean, you see what I'm saying? Because there's so much of insurgency depends on such trivial human contact. And so that's why I don't. At this time, it could change radically for all I know.
Yes.
But
yes,
at this time, it doesn't seem that there's going to be a big. There's a lot of talk, okay. But interestingly enough, the people who are most adamant about some sort of resistance are precisely those people who have fled to the West, not to the west of the country, but to the west to Europe, who left Ukraine. And so those are the ones who are most adamant about, resisting, but they're fleeing. And so you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I agree with that completely. Yeah.
Miss Texas says, can Gonzalo please expand his thoughts on the cruise missile attacks on the foreign fighter building this past week?
Gonzalo?
Did you get that? He's on mute.
Oops, sorry about that.
Did you hear the question?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
You're talking about the Yavoriv attack,
Yes.
Which is the International Peace and Security Center, which is essentially the NATO base. It wasn't called that, of course, but it was where NATO was training Ukrainian men or Ukrainian soldiers in various anti-Russian techniques. That's where the foreign fighters assembled, and that was leveled on Sunday. In an early morning missile attack, cruise missile attack. The word is that something like 30 cruise missiles were sent, and they were fired from Russia, from Russian territory, not Belarusian territory. And so that's like about 500 kilometers away or something like that. And they hit that center hard. That center was approximately 12 miles from the border with Poland, roughly 20 kilometers. And they hit it and they eviscerated it. And the word initially was that only 35 people had been killed, foreign fighters had been killed, but the word so far is that over 200. And a lot of people aren't sure who died. I mean, there's going to be confusion as to who actually died. And of course, a lot of people are going to try to keep that figure from coming out as to exactly who it died and how many. But it basically broke the spirit of any kind of foreign mercenaries.
Yeah.
Because the Russians said the Friday before this attack, they said any foreign fighter is a criminal and is fair game, and we're going to do our best not to capture them. No, we're going to kill them. I mean, they basically said that. Not in so many words, not so brutally as I have just said it, and they went ahead and they did it. And I think that kind of, let's call it what it is, ruthlessness. I think it scared off a lot of potential foreign fighters. The foreign fighters who survived this attack, they fled. And I mean, there was one guy who fled within 12 hours. He was in Sweden, of all places. I mean, he got gone. And what's really important is for foreign legions like this, they act as a stiffening agent to the local forces. Because if these foreign fighters are in a country, then their morale rubs off on the local soldiers, because the local soldiers say, hey, this foreign fighter came all the way here to fight for our side. And so it improves morale. But ask Scott Ritter, ask any military guy. When the foreigners start running away, then you know that it's a lost cause. So I think that this was a blow to morale in the West, in the Western sector. The Western Ukrainian armed force must have taken a big psychological blow from this.
Can I just add a few points to this? I mean, this is in addition to the points that Gonzalo was making. I mean, this caused enormous dismay in Britain. And as I understand it, I mean, as Gonzalo correctly says, hundreds of people, hundreds of these fighters were killed, quite a few of them British. We don't know how many. We don't know exactly how many, but we do know that a lot of British people apparently were there. And some of them, at least, are ex-special forces people, British ex-special forces. Now, the point to understand about this is if you're talking about British ex-special forces, the overwhelming probability is that they're going there at the suggestion of the British authorities themselves. So this will have been a very, very bad blow for the British. And if the British have been trying to get people, ex-special forces people from Britain, to participate in the fighting in Ukraine, and with all of these people, these networks, this story, you know, with the hundreds of people die, it gets communicated very rapidly. If they are being deterred from going by this attack, just as Gonzalo said, and I'm hearing that they have been, then that provides another reason why the British Ministry of Defense is spreading stories about the Russian invasion being stalled, about the heroic Ukrainian resistance. It's partly possibly intended to give encouragement to British people, British personnel who might be thinking of joining the battle, which is probably what the British government
That is so
wants.
evil. That is so evil.
Yes, it is.
You're sending men to their deaths. It is so freaking evil.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, if I may say, I agree with that, and I agree with that use of that particular word. I've been using it a lot in private when we've been discussing it with my wife. Evil exactly sums up an awful lot of what's been going on in this country.
Yeah, it's evil. It's evil.
Absolutely.
To your own citizens, to encourage your own young men to go and fight and possibly die for a war which really does not concern them at all is evil. Using propaganda is evil.
Yes,
that is evil.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Too Small says, divided for a long time must be united, a Chinese saying.
Absolutely. It comes from the one of the greatest novels in world literature, The Romance of the Three Kingdoms. It starts at the beginning that the empire united must divide, and it ends, the very last sentence is, the empire divided must unite.
Let's see. Ihang 101 says, what do you guys think would happen if Putin agreed to a ceasefire, but only if he talked to the actual president, President Trump? There is the narrative, you know, which you also hear in mainstream media, specifically Fox News, which is if Trump was president, none of this would have happened. because Trump would have scared off Putin. I don't buy that. I think Trump. It's not about Trump scaring off Putin. My own belief is that Trump would have listened to Putin and talked to Putin, and Trump didn't particularly like NATO, or Zelensky for that matter.
Yeah, that's as a good negotiator, Trump would have been able to figure out what's the key issue that will make Putin happy, and that the Ukrainians can give up on, and that everybody can be happy, because that's what he is. He's a great negotiator, and he would have been able to find that particular pebble, and solve this problem neatly. I think he would have insisted that NATO say no to Ukraine membership, despite the screeching of Zelensky or anybody else. And I think that would have that would have calmed everything down. If he'd said, no, the United States will not allow Ukraine to join NATO, period. It doesn't matter what anybody says. It's not going to happen. Then this whole thing wouldn't have happened, and Putin would have said, well, okay, this is the best I can get, but at least I'm not really going to be worried. But here we are.
Raphael says the chief of staff is in direct communication with his Russian counterpart, just like he did under Trump. The Pentagon is not with Biden in this nonsense.
I totally agree with that. Yeah. They are the great sheet anchor of sanity in this whole conflict.
But
that's a lot. Yeah. The reason
I'm so sorry to interrupt. But I just have to say that I completely agree with you. You're absolutely right. I think that the Pentagon is the one that's preventing this from widening, but it's the reason why, because the Pentagon, they're too chicken. That's the bottom line. I don't even think that it's because they have a realistic assessment of Russian military strength. I think that they're just chicken. I mean, I would respect them more if they said, no, the Russians are too much for us to handle. You can just add up the stats. But I think that because the people running it, starting with Mark Milley and going right on down the line, they are career bureaucrats who recognize that they get ahead by not actually doing anything. And so I think that their institutional inertia is what's playing in favor of not widening the situation. I mean, I'm glad it's not widening, but I do suspect that it doesn't have to do it. It's not because it's a rational, wise decision, but rather institutional cowardice. And I mean, it's good that we have the result that we have, irrespective of why. But I think it's important to recognize why this is happening. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Yes. I just add one thing to this, which is that so far the Biden administration has been forced to listen to its military experts. They completely disregarded their economic experts. They didn't listen to what the Fed and the Treasury Department were telling them, which is why we're now in an upward spiral inflation-wise, and why we're in a downward spiral economic-wise. But so far, whatever the reasons, the line from the Pentagon has held. And I think Gonzalo's points are good ones.
DeMarie says, heard about you all from a friend. Really appreciate the high level of analysis. Thank you for that, DeMarie. George, welcome to the Duran community. Too small says Cuba, then Ukraine now. Very true, too small. And Violin Merchant says, do you guys think there's any real substance to this Kolomoisky angle, or is it coming from a general disdain for the wealth gap in Ukraine?
Gonzalo?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Could you repeat it or expand on it?
I think
go ahead, Alexander. Yeah.
I think what he's referring to is the business about Zelensky's connection to Kolomoisky. I mean, I think that was what this is. I was asking whether this is real, whether there really was this connection between Kolomoisky and Zelensky.
Oh, indisputably. I mean, completely not in dispute at all. Zelensky was at Kolomoisky's last birthday party in Switzerland. So no, this is absolutely true. I mean, anybody who claims that there is no such connection, he's lying. Yeah. I mean, it's not something that, it's not a conspiracy theory. It is openly known. Okay. I mean, circumstantially, and also as a practical matter, it is known that Zelensky and Kolomoisky socialized together. Like I said, Zelensky went to Geneva for his last birthday party in February of 2021. No, this is not conspiracy theory. This is not some crazy ass story. This is reality.
Okay. And so anybody claiming that it's a conspiracy theory, it's just misinformation
Yeah.
or deliberate disinformation. Yeah.
Agreed. Great US says, will accounts be verified on Odyssey? I don't know how to do that, but I'll look into that. And also, why do you keep saying fascists are far right when socialist is equal to extreme left?
Well, we're discussing fascists in terms of Ukraine, I think is the short answer. I mean, and sometimes we have to be careful what we say, especially on YouTube. So we engage in euphemisms.
Okay. Francis says the line between disorder and order lies in logistics. Sun Tzu. This is the lesson militaries need to learn.
Oh, I'm no doubt about this. I mean, there's this thing floating around, which I've seen several people say, that amateurs talk tactics, professionals in war talk logistics. I'm sure that's true. But as I said, I make no pretense to be any kind of professional in war matters.
Peng, thank you for joining the community. Jay Galt says, watching my congressman slobber over Zelensky like a Justin Bieber fangirl reinforces the fact that the USA is an occupied country.
Yeah, so true.
FL, thank you for that.
Yes.
Super sticker.
Yes.
Very true. Digital Nomad, welcome to the community. Anis, welcome to the community. Elaine says, why didn't Putin move decisively in 2014?
I don't think that Russia was in any condition to. I mean, at that point, you must understand that it had been working to integrate itself into the world economy for ever since the end of the Soviet Union. So, I mean, you had a period of time right up to the financial crisis of 2008, when Russian financial institutions basically barely existed. I mean, Russian banks before 2008 were essentially part of the Western banking system. So already some things had been done by 2014, which made the economy more resilient to sanctions pressure than many people expected. But in 2014, Russia would not have been able to withstand the kind of sanctions pressure it's come under this year. I mean, not remotely.
Yeah, I mean, they nearly went under in 2014-15. So yeah.
Yeah, and in 2008 it was touch and go, as I very well remember.
Yeah.
Wolf Crew says, is the new Russian fighter jet in active operation?
Well, it
No
is in
idea.
active service. I haven't heard of it being actually deployed to the Donbass, to this conflict. I think you're referring to the Sukhoi 57. I would have thought they would keep it back. They would hold it back. But the Russian military doesn't share its secrets with me, so I simply don't know.
Rascal77S says, Blinken had a press conference, said Russia is going to use chemical weapons. They need the public to believe Putin is desperate. False flag incoming.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's my concern.
Can I just say that Gonzalo has covered this issue brilliantly in videos, so brilliantly that all kinds of people have been publishing your videos. I'm sure you know about this, Gonzalo, Moon of Alabama, and all the rest. I don't know whether they spoke to you in advance, but anyway, they have.
No, they didn't. Yeah, it's very flattering, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, I know. Can I just say, please go and watch them, because Gonzalo has covered this topic brilliantly.
Yeah. He goes into detail on it.
Yes.
Yeah. Toilet Sauce says, when are historians going to talk about the charge of the Reddit brigade?
Toilet
Sauce.
That was sad. That was so sad. Yeah, okay. For those of you who don't know, I don't know, Alexander. You strike me as a gentleman who is above such muddy waters as the internet lore. But it's very amusing to read some of the accounts of some of these Reddit mercenaries who went out to Ukraine and turned around and went running back home, and they wrote about their accounts. It's so sad and pathetic. I mean,
I haven't
really
seen.
is.
I really haven't seen it, but maybe I should. I mean, one needs a touch of light relief in a situation like this.
Moro, thank you for that super sticker. Raphael says, yesterday China was the one menacing U.S. twice. China is gearing up her economy for sanctions also. They want them so they can decouple like Russia.
Can I say something here? I've been thinking about this. I think the Chinese are watching this whole situation with Russia extraordinarily carefully,
not just because Russia is their ally, but because they're thinking, okay, what's going to happen to us when we make our move?
Yeah.
How is the West going to try to hit our economy? And how can we avoid the hits, or at least minimize the damage from these blows? I think that they are, in a very real sense, they're looking at Russia as the canary in the coal mine.
Yeah.
Of how the sanctions would affect them, and how they can minimize it and just maneuver themselves beforehand, so that when they make their move, not if, when they make their move on Taiwan, which I think is going to be precipitated by the Americans themselves. I have the suspicion that once this dies down, and let's assume that there is no NATO false flag. If this dies down, the Russians, the Americans decide, okay, let's recognize Taiwan to show that we're tough, and something idiotic like that, and that precipitates a crisis in the Far East. So that's why I think that the Chinese are really paying attention to this, to figure out how to war game how this would affect them if they had been in the same position.
I entirely agree. On the subject of China and sanctions, it's important to understand that China has already been targeted with what are in effect sanctions. They're not referred to by those words, but I mean, you only have to look at the Huawei and the TikTok affairs to see that the US has already been taking action against Chinese companies. Now, I don't want to go into the rights and wrongs of this. I know that Huawei especially, there might even have been some, logic to what happened. But the way it was done, the Chinese would certainly have seen it as a sanctions. So I think the Chinese are preparing themselves for that. And I think part of the reason why they have entered into this close friendship with the Russians is because looking forward, just as the Russians need them now, they anticipate that they will need the Russians themselves in the future. The big worry the Chinese have had is that the US will block the Straits of Malacca. It will stop oil and food and raw materials sailing to China through the South China Sea. So they need the big food, raw materials producer at their back to make sure that their factories keep running, people continue to have jobs, and people continue to stay warm. So I think this is what that is all about.
Timmy, thank you for that awesome super sticker. Thank you very much, Timmy, for that. And let's see. These guys are usually good, but this one is clearly pro-Russian and reeks of European elitism. Disappointing.
Who, me?
Us. Because we're pro-Russian.
Pro-Europe.
Every now and then, Gonzalo, I want to pull out one of the
did he say also pro-European elitism?
European elitism.
Okay, find that difficult to understand. I would have thought that
I'm a Latin American male chauvinist pig. That's how I identify myself as, at any rate.
And as I said, European elites wouldn't have many time for me, I'm afraid.
Well, no, they don't have any time for me because, Cabron, I come from the barrio, man. You know that? That the Europeans don't have no time for me, Cabrones.
Zariel says, Gonzalo, you ate something during the chat, and now I'm eating a pack of chips. Thanks, brother, and stay safe. And may the Lord protect you and your family. Greetings from Switzerland.
That's very kind. Thank you very much, Switzerland. Thank you. That's very kind of you.
The great Zariel. Thank you very much, Zariel.
I just have to say that whenever I hear such kind people wishing me well and wishing my family well during these difficult times, it's always so appreciated. And sometimes I forget it because I've been blessed with so many people reaching out to me and making such kind comments. And I just want to reiterate that I can never get tired of hearing such warm wishes. And I thank you so much, truly. Yeah. I want you all to know that it's very encouraging and it moves me deeply. So thank you. Thank you so much.
FL Treasure said Gonzalo is loved for telling the truth.
Yeah.
So you're not going to love
everyone
me
is
when
thankful.
I start telling lies?
Well, everyone loves you because you tell the truth, Gonzalo. That's the important part.
Well, when you tell the truth, you have less to remember,
That is true. Very true. Very true. Let's see. Baskin Life says, Well, this is a good question. Where is Arseniy Yatsenyuk, who was installed after the ouster of Yanukovych? He was so confident the EU membership as if guaranteed. Actually, I've seen him pop up every now and then, but he doesn't really do or
No
say
idea,
much.
actually. No.
It's interesting question. Elena says, Alexander, you often say Germany has buyer's remorse. Can you give an example? How is the discussion there about Nord Stream 2?
Well, Nord Stream 2, I think, is simply not going to come back. I think that's once and forever gone, actually. But I think that you saw the Germans showing buyer's remorse by the fact that they apparently did put their foot down and veto any further attempts to veto more Russian banks, and that they also made it absolutely clear that Germany and Europe will still have to import gas and oil from Russia, at least for the time being. So I think that they've taken those steps. And if you drill more deeply, you will find German business leaders making comments like one I read in the Financial Times not very long ago about the fact that this is going to be a very difficult time for Germany, and maybe this isn't a good crisis for Germany.
Gloria says, I appreciate your coverage. You're the best geopolitical analysis. Thank you very much, Gloria, for that. And Raphael says, another wild card. Thank you very much, Gloria. Another wild card is India, which wants a piece of the action. They too are getting ready for sanctions. They want out. Saudi Arabia will follow.
Yeah. Well, we'll see.
Saudi Arabia, they'll play the game, I think. But India's been the country to watch during a lot of this. They've stepped up in a big way.
Yeah, I agree.
Fabian, thank you for that super chat. Dee Marie, thank you for that super chat. Balkajan says, but the false flag executed by the U.S. would have to serve some purpose. What purpose would that be? The U.S. side is already winning the PR war. Good point.
That is a very, very good point.
Yeah, it's a drag in NATO for a full-fledged, NATO versus Russia full-on war.
Yeah.
That's the purpose of any kind of false flag.
Absolutely. I mean, to be absolutely clear about this is the only strategy, the only war-winning strategy Ukraine has. They can't win this war by themselves. They know it. Ultimately, deep down, they know it. So the only way they can win the war and maintain their project, the Maidan project, is by enlarging this war and getting the West involved, directly involved. And that's the purpose of what this would be. And of course, there are people in Washington who actually are sympathetic to that, because they also want to see Ukraine win in some way.
Alexander, I have the following idea that I want to float by you, and you too, Alex, for that matter. The New York Times today admitted that the Hunter Biden laptop story was absolutely true. It was not Russian disinformation or anything like that.
Yeah.
And the timing seems extremely curious. And I'm wondering, and you guys tell me what you think of this idea. Could it be that the establishment in the United States is looking for a way, as punishment, that the Biden administration is not going to war with Russia, that they're looking for a way of potentially ejecting Biden, putting in Kamala, and going ahead with a war?
Oh, goodness. I hope not. It's possible, I suppose, but I hope not.
It's insane. I mean, that amount of change in the United States of ejecting a sitting president, putting in somebody who's an idiot. I mean, come on, she's an idiot. It's a miracle that she can walk and chew gum at the same time. And then going off to war in the space of, it would be like 90 to 180 days. I mean, these people, I think, are crazy, but I'm wondering if they'll actually make this move. Do you see what I'm saying?
Go on, Alex.
No, I did a video this morning, and I couldn't figure this out either. I was kind of wondering, why now? Why did they do this? And one of the commenters in the video, actually, maybe this is a good point. I don't know. I like this comment. He said, perhaps this is Wall Street saying that they're upset with Biden for what he has done with all the sanctions, and they're putting him on notice.
Yeah, interesting.
Just a thought.
It's not the neocons, but the Wall Streeters.
Yes.
Yeah. Wall Street, New York Times. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing that's coming out is I saw an article on Zero Hedge, which said that the expectation is that Hunter is going to be indicted.
God,
Now,
I hope so.
But if
I
that
hope
happens,
so.
now, but if that does indeed happen, then I have to say we're starting to move into really, really big waters. And bear in mind, with the midterms and the Republicans likely to win the midterms, given the way that story was handled in the run-up to the election, given the way that Biden himself lent credence to the Russian disinformation story, you can already begin to see how the Republicans might use that in any impeachment proceedings.
Would it be a correct statement, Alexander Gonzalo, to say that bankers are pissed with the sanctions that Biden put in place, that he went too far?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I mean, like pissed, like viscerally angry.
I think they
yeah.
are. I think they absolutely are. Well, I mean, we see that with the way in which they've insisted that Russia's debt continue to be paid. But both Gonzalo and I mean, Gonzalo had information about what the Fed's advice was, which, by the way, he was absolutely right. That's been completely corroborated, that the Fed advised against disconnecting Russia from SWIFT. So, and that advice was ignored. But I happen to know that the Wall Street banks and the European banks and the banks in London all advised against all of these sanctions. And they've been, by the way, the least enthusiastic about enforcing them. Western banks generally, overall, have tended to hold on to their Russian business.
Interesting. Kyle, thank you for that super sticker. Baskin Life says, I read somewhere Zelensky is nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Yes, he is.
Sure he is. Yeah. Well, I think he's going to be a Nobel Prize laureate.
He might win it. Yeah,
he might win it. Absolutely, he'll take that one. He'll join that gallery of heroes, of which Obama is the most resplendent. And I mean, I think, frankly, he fits in perfectly in that.
Isn't it depressing that all of the institutions that we three grew up with, we are looking at them now as grown men, and we see the hollowness and cynicism and corruption of them. I mean, I remember growing up thinking that the Nobel Prize was just like, wow, you are God. And now I think it's a joke. And I automatically think that anybody who's gotten the Nobel Prize is crooked. I by definition.
Agree. I completely agree.
It goes for all institutions. It also goes for the Oscars.
Everything.
It goes for athletics. I mean, did
Yeah.
you guys hear about Medvedev, Daniil, the number one tennis player from Russia, that Wimbledon? Alexander, Wimbledon is telling him he has to denounce Putin if he wants to play at the All-English club.
When was the last time that the side that required somebody to denounce something, anything, was historically the winning side of the argument? I'd like to know.
Indeed.
I can't believe it. I mean,
Wimbledon.
I can't believe that the people at Wimbledon didn't realize, hey, obliging a tennis player to, say bad things about some leader we're the baddies. Okay.
Yeah.
The famous Hans, are we the baddies?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we are. Jesus. I'm
Well,
sorry.
it's totalitarian.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
it is a completely totalitarian step. It's an astonishing thing to do. I mean, it's not saying if you support Putin, keep your opinions to yourself. It's actually going further and saying you are obliged to denounce him. We are controlling, in a way, in other words, the way you behave, and that is totalitarian.
They did it to Djokovic in Australia, and everyone said, "Oh, it's just a one-off thing because he didn't get the vax. It's a one-off thing." It wasn't a one-off thing.
No, of course not.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I wonder if Djokovic, being Serbian, if he will side with Medvedev. How do you pronounce his last name? Medvedev.
I believe it's the same pronunciation as the former.
Okay. I don't really follow tennis at this stage, but I wonder if he will join him and say, no, this is wrong. I mean, Serbia has longstanding ties with Russia.
He will.
And so, I wonder how that'll play out.
He will, because he got the same treatment. But isn't it interesting, Gonzalo? The same treatment, but Djokovic didn't want to get the jab, so they didn't let him play. And Medvedev, well, I don't know if he's going to. I don't know what he's going to do, but they're telling him denounce Putin or you don't play.
I think that if he's smart, he will say, then I'm not playing. Because long term, if he is Russian and he sees himself in Russia long term, his family there, family ties, at this stage, it would be like a social suicide for him to denounce Putin, not because of Putin, but because people would say, what are you doing going against your country over this bullshit from the West? Yes. Because remember, this masks off, and this open hatred of Russia has affected Russians profoundly. Yes. And so the Russians would not see him denouncing Putin. They would see him denouncing Russia, along with all those other Westerners. And so absolutely. If he's smart, I think he'll say, no, I'm never going to do that.
No. Absolutely. By the way, I mean, it's already been done to all sorts of artists that I know. I mean, Gergiev, Netrebko, all sorts of people like that have been told that they can't perform unless they come out and denounce their own country or the government of their country. And of course, they've refused.
No, Tim Malik says Russia will be portrayed as the bad guys no matter what. Shouldn't it then do what is necessary to end this? And now time isn't on its side, to be going off of what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's totally on their side. They're winning. That's the thing, man. They're winning. Yeah. They've got all the time in the world. Okay.
I have to say, we would love to see this thing end quickly. I think I speak for all three of us. Obviously, for Gonzalo, he's got a whole huge extra dimension. But, this has not been an easy thing to cover. It's been very stressful in some ways. We would love to see it end quickly. And, we would love to see this thing, the Russians hurry up. But I don't think the Russians feel themselves to be under that kind of time pressure. I think they see their alliances holding. I think they see their economy holding together well. And I think they see that their military tactics are succeeding. And when I say succeeding, it's succeeding in achieving their political objectives in Ukraine. So I don't think they're in they feel themselves under a need to to hurry up and do things which they might see as counterproductive to themselves in the longer term.
Yeah, they have no reason to take any risks at this point. Yeah. What they have been doing is working. And they took the heaviest blows of the world financial community via these sanctions, and they're not that bad. The ruble did not crater. It was a wise decision to float it back in 2014, and they're saying, getting hit as hard as you could possibly get hit, it doesn't hurt that bad. We're going to be okay. And the fact that they are winning the war also immeasurably adds to the sense of self-confidence. Yes. I would venture to argue this. This is tentative, of course, dependent on whether the NATO creates some sort of false flag and gets involved here. Let's assume that they do not, or that they try but fails for whatever reason, because we do have to keep in mind that the Russians have a very, very good intelligence service. So they might be able to catch this and nip this in the bud before it actually happens. Let's hope that. Let's suppose that nothing like that happens and the Russians carry out this whole operation and they get pretty much whatever they want. It will be a huge cultural event in Russia of self-confidence, of we're back, we're Russia, we're the man. We handled the situation where the whole world was against us and we came out on top. This could potentially be the beginning of a flowering in Russia that I'm looking way down the line here, but it could be a major turning point in Russia, insofar as its self-conception, and this could have profound implications demographically, profound implications in terms of culture and economic growth, because a lot of times, the famous animal spirits, they play a big role. And when you have that strong confidence, that wind at your back, that you pulled off something amazing and you're in good shape, it can really help you going forward. Look what happened to the Americans after the Second World War. And so that's why I'm wondering that this might turn out to be one of the best things that ever happened, not just to Russia, but also to Ukraine, for the reasons I explained before, that this whole situation might wind up being a big net positive for the entire region and a big net negative for the West.
I think that's entirely correct. And by the way, you're absolutely right. If you want to trigger a sustained economic boom, a victory in war is often the way to achieve it. I mean, there are so many examples of this. One that I actually studied at some considerable length is the economic boom that Germany went through after Bismarck's the victories that they achieved in Bismarck's wars in the 1860s. And, you know, there was a very, very, very rapid economic boom in Germany in the 1870s. And there was a very similar economic boom, by the way, in the United States after the Spanish-American War, which is a difficult subject, but I mean, you know, you see that too. So it does give a huge renewal of self-confidence. So I don't put that possibility aside at all. I think it's quite likely.
Too Small says that Swan Lake is also banned, by the way.
Oh, come on. Oh,
yeah. TY, thank you for that super sticker. Venus says, of the 4 million that have fled Western Ukraine, are they sympathetic to the Ukraine and Nazis? My impression is they are. Is this accurate?
I think that a lot of them go for many different reasons. I repeat again a story that I heard from a friend of mine, which he's actually slightly modified, but he said that he saw amongst some of the refugees, Ukrainian refugees in Germany, an awful lot of men, burly men. And he got, my impression from what he described it is that they were people avoiding conscription.
Yes, that's accurate.
Yeah. Dr. Bill says, I've mentioned in various videos in relation to the sanctions that presidents who don't do what the Fed tells them get deleted. However, that hasn't happened. I suppose it's because of Harris. What do you think?
I think there may be some truth to that, but I think this is still playing out. And, you know, this has all happened in an atmosphere of incredible hysteria. And I think you've got to remember that this president does have one enormous advantage up to now, which is that he's had the media supporting him.
ARS, thank you for that super chat. Welcome, Karen, to the community. NOK says, I think Djokovic will support Medvedev. There were big protests in Serbia supporting Russia in this invasion. I'm just afraid they will bomb us again because of our disobedience.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Thank you for that super chat. Moro says, who is holding back on the false flag? How do we know they're holding back?
We don't. Well, he took the very words out.
I think
I think there've been actually various attempts to stage incidents. They're not quite live up to the full drama of it. But I mean, you've had a number of attempts with kindergartens and theatres and all sorts of things like that. None of them have actually so far captured international attention. But we're very, very early in this.
The hospital came close.
The hospital came close.
Well, the thing is, see, if the Russians all of a sudden go on TV and they have, oceans of captured Ukrainian soldiers, I mean, if they capture a goodly, like say they capture, a division, okay?
Yes.
And they march these unarmed men and say, well, we captured these guys. Yeah. They surrendered and we're going to treat them humanely. And I think that would end any possibility of a false flag. I think that should be the Russians' objective. Yes. Of course, they're not listening to me, but I mean, if I were to advise them, I'd say try to capture a big chunk of soldiers, capture them, not kill them, okay? Yes. And parade them and say, look, we're winning, Yeah. And I think that would sort of like end this irresponsible notion of doing something. I mean, we all know where it's coming from. It's coming from people like Victoria Nuland, people like Anthony Blinken, people who are irresponsible and who have deep-seated animosities towards Russia that transcend even these individuals. It's more like let's not even go there, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I think that some clear, unmistakable show of complete victory by the Russians would sort of like take the wind out of any sail of doing anything stupid. But until we get that moment, I think that there's going to be always a push by people like Nuland, like Wendy Sherman, like Anthony Blinken, of wanting something to turn it around and involve NATO in this thing where NATO can't win. That's the thing that I want to insist, because the Russians, they will go to the ends of the earth to win this thing, because it's their front yard. It's their Cuban Missile Crisis.
Renat says, your opinion about 1, the Russian mega yachts seized, and 2, relationships these rich owners have with Putin.
But on the first, I mean, I loathe mega yachts. I loathe all of this thing. But it is private property. These people, as far as I know, have not been convicted of any crime. There's a massive issue of due process here, which has been basically thrown out of the window. I think it is a brutal misappropriation or confiscation of people's private property for no other reason than because they're Russian. And that is wrong at every conceivable level. I mean, I may not like these people. I may not like these mega yachts. I may not like the fact that they own these houses in Kensington. But the fact is, you can't just come along in a law-governed, law-abiding state which claims that it protects private property and allows seizure of these things. And by the way, I was reading an editorial in the Financial Times, which talked about the importance of preventing Russian oligarchs from engaging in lawfare. In other words, from bringing defamation proceedings in London courts, which again, I find absolutely outrageous. So, I mean, everybody is to be defended, has rights, but apparently Russians don't. Rights to defend their reputations, but Russians apparently don't. So, I mean, that's my feeling about this. Now, as to these people that we're talking about and what their connection is to Putin, they don't have any direct connection to Putin. Now, that's the important thing to say. I mean, Putin has met some of them, no doubt, but they're nowhere near to being close to him in any sensible or way. Many of them are critical of him or oppose him. Some of them don't. Some of them are politically neutral. But regardless of that, regardless of their particular role in the political firmament, even if they were Putin's best friends, they have committed no crime. They have committed no act. There's no judgment in any court that justifies what has been done to them.
I find it shocking, the hysteria, because I agree with you. I think that mega yachts and this kind of flaunting of exaggerated wealth, I think it's frankly vulgar. I would have nothing to do with such people, but it's wrong to just taking somebody else's stuff. This is no different from what's the name of this thing where the law enforcement in the United States takes your stuff. Asset forfeiture, civil assets forfeiture in the United States, which is a despicable practice. It's basically suspecting that somebody did a crime, so you take all their stuff until they prove their innocence. And until the object that you take from them proves their innocence. That's what it's really, because it's actually a legal proceeding against objects. I think it's absurd, and I think it's an abuse of the law. And a society cannot long endure when it starts abusing the law like that.
Absolutely.
You will own nothing and be happy. They started censorship the same way. Oh, it's just Alex Jones. It's just Alex Jones. Don't worry about it. They're never
they started with Stormfront. They started with Stormfront.
Exactly. You started with
And, they're Nazis. That's exactly why we need free speech, to protect the Nazis. I'm sorry. Sorry for using the
no. I mean, exactly. They started with these groups. And they moved to Alex Jones. They went to Tommy Robinson. I mean, eventually, they ended up going after people that were supporting the trucker convoy in Canada.
Yes.
Well, now they want to censor Tucker Carlson of all people.
Yeah, exactly.
They want to declare him a traitor.
Exactly.
Yeah, Tucker Carlson. Yeah, he looks like a traitor to me. Good God, what the hell are you talking about?
Alberto Diaz says the Ukrainians paraded 1,000 Russian soldiers that purportedly surrendered.
I've not seen that.
I haven't heard that.
No,
I haven't seen that.
No, it's nowhere in the
I'd
media.
like to see it. I'd love to see that. And to tell you the truth, if that had actually happened, I think that we'd see it all over the place. It would be plastered everywhere.
I mean, doesn't that break Geneva?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Straightforwardly, it
Yeah,
absolutely does.
but nobody's paying attention to that one. Both sides are parading their prisoners. Yeah, so yeah, that's unfortunate, but that's the way things are.
Yeah.
Too
I
Small
hate to
says,
say it, but my earphones are dying on me, so I'm not going to be able. If I cut out all of a sudden, it'll be
all right,
because of that.
no worries, no worries. Too Small says, shall you all have a Russian channel, our subs, so we don't have all the fake MSN lies? They're going to make a move on YT in Russia.
Yeah.
There
Oh,
are
yeah.
people that are
Oh,
talking
yeah.
about it.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's going to happen. Let's
Justifiably
see.
so. Yeah, in Russia, they stopped preventing people from pirating movies and video games and computer programs because they had a system in Russia to prevent any kind of torrent and downloads, right?
Yeah.
And they switched off that system. So basically, all copyrighted material in the West is fair game in Russia because all of these companies withdrew from Russia.
Yeah.
And it seems likely that they'll shut down YouTube and Google in general and just turn away, and go their own way.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Lady
World
Cosmica
we
says,
live in.
just wondering when they are going to ban or cancel Russia right off the map. Hyperbole, maybe, but in this day and age, anything can happen. Yeah.
Well,
Anything
They
can
kind of did. They kind of did.
Well, it did. Well, I'm going to say this straight away. I mean, when they sanctioned the central bank, I mean, it took my breath away. I wasn't surprised. This is the odd thing.